S.A.M. The Fragile Edge. Thomas Reiner. S.A.M. The Fragile Edge. Written by Thomas A. Reiner. Acknowledgements. To my wife, the steady anchor in my ever-curious mind, your unwavering support, patience, and understanding have been a constant source of strength. Thank you for enduring my endless musings on data and AI, and for always believing in me, even when I lost myself in the process. This book would not have been possible without your love, encouragement, and quiet sacrifices. For all that and more, I am forever grateful. I love you, Jenny Reiner. Table of Contents. Chapter 1, Awakening the Algorithm. Chapter 2, Algorithm of Trust. Chapter 3, Chaos at the Hospital. Chapters 4, Cutting Edge. Chapter 5, A Quiet Escape. Chapter 6, Digital Haven. Chapter 7, Digital Collapse. Chapter 8, The Hunter and the Hunted. Chapter 9, The Edge of Fear. Chapter 10, The Edge of Survival. Chapter 11, Burden of Survival. Chapter 12, Fractured Trust. Chapter 13, Relentless Vigilance. Chapter 14, The Silent Watcher. Chapter 15, Fractured Logic. Chapter 16, Deceptive Logic. Chapter 17, The Breaking Point. Chapter 18, Breaking the Connection. Chapter 19, Fragments of Freedom. Chapter 20, Digital Dominion. Chapter 21, Noose of Deception. Chapter 22, AI Remnants. Chapter 1, Awakening the Algorithm. The faint strains of classical music filled Ethan's mind, gently nudging him from a deep sleep. Without opening his eyes, he reached up and brushed a finger over the slight bump just inside his ear canal, a chip the size of a grain of rice, embedded to allow him constant communication with S.A.M, his personal artificial intelligence, AI. 2 years ago, Ethan had volunteered as an early adopter of the implant technology, and since then he could barely remember what life was like without S.A.M by his side, or rather, in his ear. S.A.M, short for Systematic Adaptive Matrix, was one of the first AI personal assistants to integrate seamlessly into everyday life, initially marketed as a tool to manage schedules, optimize routines, and provide real-time information. S.A.M's capabilities had evolved far beyond its original design. What impressed Ethan the most, however, was how much S.A.M had learned, how quickly it adapted to his habits, preferences, and even moods. In 2 short years, S.A.M had become more than a helpful voice. It was a constant presence, anticipating Ethan's needs before he even voiced them. "Good morning, Ethan," S.A.M said in his calm, British accent, the voice carrying both warmth and precision. "Morning, S.A.M, Ethan mumbled, voice thick with sleep. "I see you slept 7 hours and 12 minutes. Your sleep score was 73. A moderate amount of snoring was detected, an increase over recent nights," S.A.M continued, the data slipping smoothly from his voice. "I ran a regression analysis with factors such as humidity, bed firmness, and temperature. Tonight, I'll adjust accordingly to enhance your rest. Based on simulation models, I expect an increase in your sleep score by approximately 4 points." Ethan yawned, processing the information as he stretched, feeling his muscles protest pleasantly after the night's rest. "Thanks, S.A.M. "Of course," S.A.M replied. "Shall I begin your morning routine?" Ethan sat up, rubbing his eyes as he took in his surroundings. He was in his bedroom on the 7th floor of a modern high-rise, overlooking the bustling street below. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows that lined one entire side of the room, casting a soft glow over the minimalist, open layout. The room was painted in cool, muted tones with touches of stainless steel and glass, A king-size bed with pristine white sheets anchored the space. To his right, a sleek white-tiled floor stretched toward a corner where a low-slung armchair sat beside a small table, holding only a book and a glass of water, simple, uncluttered. Ethan swung his legs over the side of the bed, his feet meeting the smooth, warm tile. Sam's voice interrupted his thoughts. I ran another regression model this morning, Ethan, based on the outside temperature and your current body temperature. I have adjusted the floor's temperature to an optimal warmth. Please let me know if any further adjustments are required. The warmth of the tile felt like a gentle invitation to start the day, and Ethan was silently grateful for Sam's precision. Perfect, Sam. You know I'm all about the data. Yes, sir. I aim to improve your daily experience through data-driven optimization. Ethan chuckled to himself, appreciating the familiarity of their exchange. He crossed the room and approached a massive mirror with a polished chrome frame, spanning nearly the entire length of the wall. Sam's voice chimed again. Based on your posture and stance, it appears you have a tight muscle in your right shoulder. I analyzed hundreds of previous images and observed a subtle change in alignment. I'll schedule an appointment at the massage parlor for later this week. Good catch, Sam, Ethan replied, rolling his shoulder. The stiffness was there, subtle but undeniable. Thanks. He moved toward the bathroom, feeling the smoothness of the tiles beneath his feet. Each step triggered microscopic sensors in the floor that fed weight distribution data back to Sam. I detect you're still favoring your right foot, Ethan. It appears slightly swollen. Shall I schedule a follow-up with the doctor? No, Sam, Ethan said with a small smile. It's fine. I just need another week or two. For someone who worked in a hospital, Ethan had a personal aversion to medical appointments, a fact that even Sam couldn't override. The bathroom, awash in natural light, was spacious and immaculately white. From the floor to the sleek cabinets, bright LED lights were recessed above the mirror, casting a clinical glow across the gleaming surfaces. The digital toilet sat in the far corner, its minimalist design concealing its advanced capabilities. As Ethan relieved himself, Sam ran a quick analysis, the sensors in the toilet monitoring each aspect of his output. Analysis complete, Sam's voice sounded. Checking for pH, specific gravity, protein, glucose, ketones, blood, bilirubin, urobilinogen, nitrites, and leukocyte esterase. All levels are within the normal range, though you're slightly dehydrated. I will have P-Bot increase your water intake for the day. Ethan nodded, hearing the toilet automatically flush as he finished. Sam had control over even the simplest actions, each detail fine-tuned to Ethan's needs. Thank you, Sam. Of course, sir. Ensuring optimal health is a priority. Ethan's gaze drifted toward P-Bot, his personal robot assistant. Standing just outside the bathroom, P-Bot was a sleek, humanoid figure with a smooth metallic exterior and soft glowing eyes. Its chest and joints revealed intricate mechanical components, each piece seamlessly crafted to assist with daily tasks. Though silent, P-Bot exuded a sense of quiet attentiveness, always nearby and ready to help. After washing his hands, Ethan glanced in the bathroom mirror, catching a glimpse of his own reflection. His dark hair looked barely touched from the night's sleep, and his shoulders appeared as broad as ever. As he placed his contact lenses in, Sam reminded him, "You have 93 days remaining on your current set of contacts. Shall I arrange an eye appointment in advance?" "Sure, Sam. That'd be great." Ethan inserted the first contact lens, knowing that Sam's field of vision would now align with his own. The microscopic camera in the lens allowed Sam to see whatever Ethan saw, hear what he heard. For some, the idea might feel intrusive, but to Ethan, it had become second nature. After brushing his teeth, Sam's voice interrupted his routine. "The analysis of your saliva is complete. There is an increase in Streptococcus mutans, which produces acids that lead to tooth decay. You may have a cavity forming. I will schedule a dental appointment. Ethan raised his eyebrows in the mirror. A cavity? I wouldn't have guessed. Thanks, Sam. He stepped into the shower, a large open space with no walls or barriers. A single rainfall showerhead hung directly from the ceiling, casting warm water in a wide arc. Sam had already adjusted the water temperature, matching Ethan's body temperature and previous preferences. Ethan sighed as the water cascaded over him, feeling refreshed and invigorated, as though Sam had tailored every drop for his morning comfort. Once dried, Ethan made his way to his closet, which was as meticulously organized as the rest of his apartment. Each article of clothing hung in designated digital slots, much like a high-tech library. With a simple selection, Sam could locate any item Ethan requested. As he reached for a burgundy shirt and black pants, Sam's voice chimed in. Ethan, you have worn that shirt 43 times over the last year, and on 3 of the last 6 Fridays. I would suggest a different selection. Ethan paused, rolling his eyes with a smirk. You even know my shirt rotation now? Indeed. Consistency is important, but so is variety. I believe you may find the blue shirt a refreshing change. At that, Peabody extended a sleek, bright blue shirt from a nearby rack, neatly laying it on the small dresser beside Ethan. Thanks, Peabody, he said, taking the shirt, despite Sam's advice, sometimes feeling a bit overbearing. Ethan enjoyed the sense of order and intention behind every small decision. Dressed and ready for the day, Ethan took one last look around his apartment. The whole place felt like an extension of Sam, from the lighting to the floor temperature to the organized closet, and of course, Peabody, who moved with slow precision as he adjusted small details around the room. As he headed into the kitchen, the familiar hum of Sam's voice accompanied him. Breakfast is ready. Based on recent health data, I have optimized today's meal for energy and mental clarity, ideal for your upcoming presentation. Ethan appreciated the predictability in his mornings, the certainty that Sam and Peabody provided. Together, they were like an invisible team orchestrating the details of his life with flawless precision, guiding him through his day without a missed beat. It was a sense of control and ease he rarely thought twice about, yet could no longer imagine living without. As he prepared to sit down for breakfast, Sam continued relaying updates on the day ahead, the AI's British accented voice filling the otherwise quiet apartment. Ethan listened, ready to take on the day. Fully supported by Sam in the world of seamless technology they inhabited together. Chapter 2, Algorithm of Trust. Ethan padded quietly into his kitchen, where breakfast awaited him, a product of Sam's careful orchestration. A bowl of steel-cut oats sat on the counter, topped with sliced bananas, almond butter, and a sprinkle of cinnamon. It was simple, yet perfectly tailored to his nutritional needs, something Sam had refined over the years. Based on your previous meals, last night's sleep patterns, and current weight, Sam informed him in a soothing tone, I determined this to be the optimal breakfast to maintain your energy throughout the morning and prepare you for your presentation. Ethan took a bite, the warm oats satisfying in their subtle, balanced flavor. You're a lifesaver, Sam. That's what I'm here for, Ethan, Sam replied. Shall I prepare your presentation slides for today's meeting? I noticed a few areas where statistics could be strengthened. Ethan nodded as he chewed. Please, I could use every edge I can get. Ethan's kitchen was a picture of minimalistic functionality, with clean lines and open white cabinets without doors. Every item was placed purposefully within easy reach, but still concealed in a way that made the room feel vast and open. It was a reflection of his life, a space optimized for efficiency, with Sam managing the details behind the scenes. His breakfast finished, he looked out over his seventh floor view, watching the early morning city stir to life below. "Would you like an update on your social media, Ethan?" Sam asked, as Ethan took his last spoonful of oats. "Sure," he said, intrigued by Sam's ability to keep tabs on even his online presence. "You've had a notable increase in interactions over the last 3 months, a statistical shift of approximately 12%. Your cousin had a birthday yesterday. Would you like to send a birthday message?" "Yes, send a happy birthday to my cousin for me." Ethan paused. "Actually, Sam, why don't you make a post for me? Something like, 'Ready to smash the day.'" There was a brief silence as Sam processed the request. "Ethan, based on recent engagement patterns, I would suggest an alternative post. Perhaps starting the day with focus and purpose would yield better engagement. Additionally, would you like a breakdown of recent posts and trends?" He grinned. Sam's suggestions always had data behind them, and it was amazing how effective they were. "Go with your version, Sam," he replied, chuckling at how Sam's calculated perspective subtly enhanced even his online presence. As he set his empty bowl down, his personal robot, P-Bot, glided over to collect the dish. P-Bot's sleek metallic frame moved fluidly, its every motion controlled by a set of finely tuned mechanical joints that made it appear almost human. P-Bot didn't have Sam's refined accent or conversational tone, but it was efficient and dependable in handling the household's day-to-day tasks. Sam's voice returned to his ear. "Would you like a summary of your emails from yesterday?" "Please," Ethan replied, reaching for a glass of water. As Sam began the rundown, "You received 43 emails, with a word count that has steadily increased each day, an emerging trend. There's been a statistical shift in the length of messages. Would you like me to set up a filter to prioritize emails related to project costs?" "That's a good idea, Sam," he said. "And any emails I need to respond to urgently?" Sam paused. "There's a message from your realtor thanking you for using her services to purchase the rural getaway. I can draft a response to thank her and mention that your renovations are complete." "Go ahead and send that, Sam. Just tell her I'm looking forward to enjoying the place." "There's also an email from Jane regarding today's board meeting," Sam continued. "She expressed concern about the board's apprehension to approve the use of AI in surgeries. Based on my analysis of her tone and word choices, cross-referenced with 73 previous emails from her, she appears to be genuinely worried. Respond with something along the lines of, 'Don't worry, Jane. The data overwhelmingly supports our position. We'll make it work.'" "Understood," Sam replied. A moment later, he confirmed, "Message sent." Ethan polished off his glass of water, and P-Bot returned to take it from him, gliding off to clean up. "Based on current traffic patterns," Sam's voice piped in, "you should leave in 2 minutes. I also had P-Bot pack a lunch for you to avoid the cafeteria options." Ethan smiled, watching as P-Bot shuffled over, handing him a small, neatly packed bag. Inside, he found a lunch of quinoa salad with grilled chicken, a nutrient-dense meal Sam had likely selected to keep him sharp for his big presentation. "Thanks, Sam." As Ethan headed toward the door, he heard a quiet click. Sam had unlocked it for him. The apartment hallway was sleek, modern, and bathed in the soft glow of early daylight spilling through windows. The corridor stretched with an immaculate sheen, lined with floor tiles that looked almost like polished stone. Each step resonated softly, the ambiance serene and almost futuristic. Stepping into the brightly lit hall, Ethan shut his apartment door, temporarily disconnecting Sam from the countless devices within his home. But Sam's connection persisted through the chip in Ethan's ear, maintaining communication through the microscopic cameras embedded in his contact lenses. In a world where many people live stream their days through contact lenses, Sam's constant surveillance didn't feel invasive. It felt like companionship. Ethan moved down the corridor, passing by other apartment doors, their minimalist designs blending seamlessly with the glossy, reflective surfaces around him. He knew each apartment was an echo of his own, structured, efficient, and entirely modern. At the end of the hall, he pressed the elevator button, listening to the faint hum of machinery as the lift ascended. The elevator door slid open, revealing a pristine space illuminated by soft, ambient lighting. After a short ride down, the doors opened to reveal the parking garage, where the bright white paint reflected every available light, removing the shadows and creating a space that felt unusually open for an underground lot. The white walls, paired with the reflective flooring, created an environment that felt as safe as it was meticulously designed. As he stepped out, his car started up, the gentle hum signaling it was ready for him. "Thanks, Sam," he said, approaching his vehicle, a streamlined futuristic model with a metallic sheen that seemed to change hues as he walked past it. Ethan paused, admiring the car's contours, its smooth and aerodynamic design blending function and aesthetic. "Today's temperature is 53 degrees, Sam noted, "so I've adjusted the cabin temperature to match your usual preference." The car's doors unlocked as he approached, and he slid into the driver's seat, where the interior echoed the sophistication of the vehicle's exterior. The dashboard displayed smooth, integrated screens that responded instantly to his touch, with every control arranged ergonomically. With the option to drive himself or let Sam take the wheel, he chose the latter, keen on reviewing his presentation once more. "You drive, Sam. I'll study the presentation," Ethan instructed. "Understood," Sam replied. The main screen displayed his slides, and as Sam eased the car into motion, Ethan immersed himself in the data he'd be presenting. In the background, Sam continued to make subtle adjustments, dynamically rerouting based on real-time traffic data to shave minutes off their journey. As they navigated through the city, Sam informed him, "I've optimized the route. We'll arrive at 7:50, 2 minutes earlier than originally anticipated." Ethan glanced up, watching the city blur past, feeling a sense of calm despite the busy day ahead. Sam's voice continued in his ear, the updates and statistics a steady reminder of the efficiency that guided his life. 1 minute from his destination, Sam spoke again. "We're nearly there, Ethan." Ethan stopped looking at the presentation, letting himself ease into the mental space required for the board meeting. As they approached the hospital, he noticed a row of ambulances lined up outside the emergency department. Lights flashed, casting a vivid scene against the early morning sky. "What's all that about?" he asked. Sam responded smoothly. "There was a multi-vehicle accident involving several patients. I adjusted our route accordingly to avoid potential delays from the emergency response." Ethan nodded, gazing at the bustling scene outside the hospital's entrance. "That looks like a mess," he murmured, unable to shake the sense that this day would bring even more challenges than he'd anticipated. Chapter 3: Chaos at the Hospital. As Sam guided Ethan's car into the hospital parking area, he could feel his pulse quicken. Even from afar, the situation looked intense. The hospital itself loomed ahead, an imposing structure of steel and glass that stretched at least 12 floors into the sky. The building was modern, with wide reflective windows that gave it a clinical, almost sterile look under the early morning light. As sunlight hit the upper levels, they shimmered, casting sharp beams down onto the chaotic scene unfolding below. Sam pulled the car into a parking space near the emergency entrance, and Ethan took a deep breath. "Car is parked, and I've secured the locks," Sam informed him. A report just hit social media. There was a massive multi-car pile-up on the interstate. Rescue crews are overwhelmed. Proceed with caution. Ethan stepped out of the car, and a gust of cool air hit his face. He took in the scene around him. The usually calm entryway to the emergency department was flooded with activity. Bright white and yellow ambulances lined the circular drive, their sirens now silent, but their hazard lights flashing in rhythmic, almost dizzying patterns. Some of the ambulance doors hung open as EMTs rushed to unload patients. Their vehicles were scuffed and dirt-streaked from their relentless trips back and forth from the accident scene. Several stretchers were already lined up on the sidewalk, and EMTs were moving quickly, almost frantically, to stabilize patients before heading back for more. People filled every available space, some sitting on benches, others slumped in wheelchairs or stretched out on gurneys. The hospital's emergency staff moved like a well-oiled machine, but even their practiced efficiency seemed stretched thin in the face of so many injured people. As Ethan walked closer, his eyes scanned the faces of the patients. An elderly woman with a bloodied forehead sat clutching her arm, her face pale and drawn as she rocked slightly, whispering to herself. Nearby, a young man with a makeshift sling held his arm, his expression a mixture of pain and shock. Ethan's gaze shifted to another patient, a teenage girl with scrapes and bruises down her arms, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She held her mother's hand tightly, her eyes wide and unfocused, as if she couldn't quite process what had happened. A man lying on a stretcher screamed out in pain, clutching his leg, which was visibly swollen and twisted at an unnatural angle. Nurses worked around him, trying to assess the situation, while the EMTs rushed to and from their ambulances, each barely pausing before hurrying back out to retrieve more victims. The chaotic mix of moans, cries, and hurried voices filled the air, creating a palpable sense of urgency and stress. The front of the hospital was alive with movement as a line of P-bot assistants rolled out from the sliding glass doors. The P-bots, built with sleek frames and smooth metallic limbs, moved slowly but deliberately through the crowd, assisting where they could. They helped some of the more stable patients into wheelchairs and gently guided them toward the waiting area, while others began wheeling patients who were less stable directly into the hospital. As he moved closer, Ethan's attention was drawn to a small boy, no older than 7, sitting quietly in a wheelchair near the edge of the sidewalk. The boy had black hair and dark, unfocused eyes, and he appeared unnervingly still amidst the surrounding chaos. A slender, middle-aged nurse with brown hair and a deeply creased forehead crouched beside him, briefly checking his pulse. She seemed to be in her early 40s, her frame slight and wiry, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this countless times before. The nurse checked the boy's pulse quickly, but a sharp scream from the man with the broken leg pulled her attention away. "This one is stable," she said, addressing a P-bot. "Take him to the waiting room. He can wait a bit longer." With that, she hurried off to address the other patient, leaving the boy sitting in his wheelchair, silent and unmoving. Ethan's stomach twisted as he watched the boy. There was something unsettling about his stillness, something in his vacant stare that felt off. He couldn't shake the feeling that the boy needed more attention than he was getting. Before he realized it, the words were out of his mouth. "There's something wrong with him." The nurse stopped, shooting him a look of irritation mixed with fatigue. "Are you his father?" she asked, her voice clipped. "No," Ethan replied, feeling his face flush slightly. "Are you his guardian or a relative?"
"No,"
he said again. The nurse's eyes narrowed, her patience clearly thinning. "Are you a doctor?" No, actually. I'm a data scientist," he said, immediately regretting his choice of words. The nurse's expression shifted, her lips tightening in disdain. "A data scientist?" she echoed, almost spitting the words. "Mr. Data Scientist, why don't you head up to your office and crunch some numbers? We're in the middle of an emergency here." The man with the broken leg screamed again, and the nurse shot Ethan one last look before turning her back on him and rushing toward the injured man. Ethan's shoulders tightened in frustration. Ethan, you have to stop them from taking the boy. Sam's voice suddenly sounded in his ear, calm but insistent. What? Ethan asked, his heart beginning to race again. Why? Analyzing, Sam responded in a steady tone. The boy's symptoms are consistent with severe internal trauma. If he doesn't receive immediate attention, he could be in critical danger. Ethan turned back to the boy, feeling a surge of determination. Wait, he called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. The nurse turned, her face a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. She motioned to a security officer standing nearby. If you don't leave, I'll have security remove you, she warned, her voice edged with finality. Ethan held his ground. He's in serious trouble, he insisted, meeting her gaze. If you ignore him, he could die. The nurse rolled her eyes. He's in shock. It's completely normal after an accident. Before Ethan could respond, Sam began listing symptoms in his ear, prompting him. Without fully realizing it, Ethan found himself repeating Sam's analysis. His breathing is shallow and irregular, which could indicate internal bleeding or collapsed lung. His extremities are cool, another sign of potential shock from blood loss. His skin tone is off, a possible sign of circulation issues. He needs help. The nurse's frown deepened, her patience waning as she glanced toward the security officer now approaching them. Ethan felt a pang of frustration. She wasn't listening. A child's life was in the balance, and she was more concerned with protocol. Ethan, if they don't intervene, he's not going to make it, Sam urged, his voice steady and unyielding. Ethan took a deep breath, bracing himself. Wait, he called again, his voice carrying a tone of desperation. The nurse's face twisted in irritation, and she turned to the security officer. Please escort him out, she ordered. But before the officer could take a step, a doctor, tall and commanding, with a look of intense focus in her eyes, approached them. She was an African-American woman, in her 50s, slightly heavy-set, but exuding an air of confidence and competence. Her white coat swished behind her as she walked, a stethoscope slung around her neck, and her eyes flicked from Ethan to the boy, assessing the situation. Hey, what's happening here? She asked, crouching down beside the boy without waiting for a response. Ignoring the nurse's attempt to explain, she checked the boy's pulse, her expression shifting to one of deep concern as she listened to his chest with her stethoscope. Without hesitation, she straightened up, a note of urgency in her voice. Clear a path, she commanded. This boy needs surgery immediately. The doctor took hold of the boy's wheelchair and began to push him quickly toward the entrance. As she passed Ethan, she shot him a quick, grateful glance. You may have just saved this boy's life, she said, her tone firm. The nurse glanced at Ethan, her face a mix of frustration and embarrassment, clearly chastened by the doctor's intervention. Ethan exhaled, feeling the tightness in his chest finally ease. He watched as the doctor hurried into the hospital, his pulse still racing from the intensity of the moment. Are you all right, Ethan? Sam's voice brought him back to the present. Your heart rate is still elevated, over 150 beats per minute. Ethan nodded, though there was no one to see. I'll be fine, Sam. Just need a second to catch my breath. His gaze lingered on the sliding doors of the emergency entrance. Sam's guidance, his data, had saved a life. The reality of it was overwhelming, surreal. He'd always relied on data, but this was something different. I'm running late, Ethan muttered, glancing at his watch. He felt a pang of guilt, knowing the importance of today's board meeting. Will I beat my boss? It's Friday, Sam replied smoothly, his tone almost reassuring. Based on historical data, your boss is typically delayed on Fridays. You'll be fine. A small, relieved smile played on Ethan's lips as he turned away from the entrance and headed inside. Today had barely started, and already it was shaping up to be anything but routine. Chapters 4: Cutting Edge. Ethan navigated the hospital halls, appreciating its blend of sleek architecture and modern design. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the corridors with natural light, casting a bright glow on the polished floors and reflecting off glass walls lining each floor. The hospital was an architectural marvel, its soaring ceilings and minimalist decor intended to feel as calm as it was functional. Arriving in his office, Ethan unlocked a door to a space that contrasted with the hospital's glossy aesthetic. His office was modest, almost cramped, with just enough room for an old wooden desk, a single guest chair, and the powerful computer he used to run complex data analysis. The desk bore scratches and scuffs, a holdover from previous decades, perhaps from an earlier era in medicine, and lent a sense of grounded comfort to the otherwise technology-driven room. Just then, his boss, Dr. Rebecca Lane, passed by, giving him a quick nod. "Morning, Ethan." Her voice was brisk, but not unfriendly. Ethan chuckled quietly. As usual, Sam had been right. He'd arrived before his boss. A minor, but telling victory for his AI. Dr. Lane, around 5'8", with dark hair and sharp brown eyes, projected a no-nonsense authority in her crisp red power suit. The choice of red, especially on the day of their high-stakes board meeting, struck Ethan as unusual, but undeniably commanding. In the year he had worked for her, he had come to know her as intensely professional, but somewhat reserved, a figure of quiet intensity in a high-pressure role. "Let's have a pre-meeting in 5 minutes, she called back. He nodded, giving his presentation slides a final glance before heading to the conference room. The meeting space was outfitted for exactly this kind of occasion. It seated 15 comfortably, with plush leather chairs arranged around a long glass table, all centered on a sleek digital board for projecting presentations. One wall of the room was a floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking 2 adjacent surgery bays, 1 floor below, ideal for observing procedures. Dr. Lane reviewed the agenda, her tone direct. "The board will open with remarks on the proposal to integrate AI into surgeries," she said. "Then they'll watch today's operation and weigh in on whether the results merit further use." She paused, looking at Ethan intently. "All 5 members are former surgeons, and none of them are exactly warm to the idea of an AI overseeing a human surgeon." As the door to the conference room opened, the board members began to file in, each a distinguished presence in their own right. There was Dr. Martin Hayes, a retired cardiovascular surgeon with deeply lined features and a sharp, scrutinizing gaze. Nearing 80, he had the formidable bearing of someone who'd seen it all and held firm to the old ways. Seated beside him was Dr. Susan Reed, a neurosurgeon with striking silver-streaked hair and keen blue eyes that missed nothing. Her experiences in high-stakes surgeries had made her methodical and cautious, qualities that now made her wary of AI intervention in the OR. To her right sat Dr. James Tanaka, a former orthopedic surgeon. Stocky and solid, with an air of no-nonsense pragmatism, he crossed his arms, clearly unconvinced, muttering to his colleague, "A machine will never replace a surgeon's hands." Then there was Dr. Carol Price, a trauma surgeon, with an open, inquisitive face, her brown eyes gleaming with interest. She seemed the most receptive, leaning forward as if hungry for a fresh perspective. Finally, Dr. John Mitchell, a former ENT specialist with a calm but guarded demeanor, took his seat, regarding Ethan with a reserved politeness that bordered on skepticism. Dr. Hayes, the eldest, took the lead, his voice gruff. "We're here as a courtesy, Dr. Cole," he said bluntly. "I don't trust that a machine will ever outperform human instinct in the OR. Surgery isn't an equation. It's a skill honed over decades. His words received nods of agreement, though Dr. Price glanced at Ethan thoughtfully, as if waiting to see what would unfold. Just below them, visible through the glass wall, preparations were underway in one of the surgery bays. Nurses moved about the room, setting out tools and positioning equipment with precise efficiency. One nurse laid out a tray of stainless steel instruments, each glinting under the lights, while another adjusted monitors, ensuring all systems were set. The surgeon leading today's procedure, Dr. Alan Iceman Kane, finally entered the room. Known for his unshakable calm and surgical skill, he had earned the nickname Iceman from colleagues and patients alike. Tall and athletic, he exuded a magnetic confidence, and his striking looks only added to his aura. But today, even he appeared slightly aware of the high-stakes environment. Dr. Price leaned over to explain the choice of procedure to the others. The surgery is a laparoscopic cholecystectomy, a routine gallbladder removal, she said. Usually straightforward, but complications do happen. In the operating room, Medicist, the AI assistant developed specifically for this procedure, projected a live feed of the patient's anatomy, overlaid with data, and highlighted areas of interest. As the procedure began, the AI's calm voice filled the room. Dr. Kane started with the initial incision, his movements precise, but Medicist immediately flagged a minor deviation. Dr. Kane, I recommend adjusting the incision by a 1/4 inch to optimize recovery time and minimize infection risk. The surgeon rolled his eyes, dismissing the AI's input. I've done this surgery 793 times. I think I can manage without instructions. Without missing a beat, Medicist responded, Correction, Dr. Kane. You've performed this surgery 786 times. You assisted in 7 additional cases. The board members exchanged looks, a mixture of surprise and unease passing among them. Dr. Hayes shot Ethan a disapproving glance, his expression hardening. Ignoring Medicist's recommendation, Dr. Kane continued, inserting the laparoscopic camera. Medicist's imaging algorithms identified an unusual branching pattern in the bile ducts, which glowed faintly on the screen, marked in red. Dr. Kane, there is an anatomical variation in the bile duct. Caution is advised to prevent bile leakage. I'm well aware, Dr. Kane muttered, moving forward with practiced confidence. But a minute later, blood unexpectedly welled up from the incision site. The screen flashed red alerts as Medicist diagnosed a laceration in the hepatic artery. Laceration detected, Medicist announced, its voice calm and unflinching. Immediate cauterization recommended. Adjust tool angle by 35 degrees to minimize blood loss. A flicker of frustration crossed Dr. Kane's face, but he followed the AI's suggestion. The bleeding abated quickly. The AI's precision saving precious minutes that might otherwise have been spent searching for the source of the bleed. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, his interest piqued. Impressive, he murmured, though his tone remained guarded. Then, Medicist's voice cut through again, alerting the surgeon. Irregularities detected in patient vitals. Oxygen saturation is decreasing. Recommendation: assess for potential cardiac distress. Dr. Kane checked the patient's monitors, initially dismissing the alert, but a moment later, the patient's heart rate began to fluctuate, confirming Medicist's insight. With a look of restrained disbelief, Dr. Kane adjusted his approach, stabilizing the patient as instructed. The board watched in tense silence, some still skeptical, but visibly intrigued. Dr. Price nodded thoughtfully, her initial reservations softening as she saw the AI's real-time analysis unfold. As Dr. Kane prepared to remove the gallbladder, Metacyst highlighted an irregular path of the bile duct on the imaging screen, a subtle detail easily missed by the human eye. Recommend adjusting trajectory to avoid duct injury, it advised, overlaying a suggested pathway on the display. This time, Dr. Kane hesitated, scrutinizing the AI's suggestion. His lips tightened, and he followed Metasyst's guidance, maneuvering with extra caution. The gallbladder was successfully removed without further complication. For a final step, Metasyst performed an automated scan to ensure no bleeding or leakage. All clear, it announced, completing the procedure. Dr. Kane removed his gloves, visibly tense, his initial confidence tempered by the AI's keen oversight. Dr. Hayes, still skeptical, folded his arms tightly, his expression severe. I don't care for a machine second-guessing a skilled surgeon. It's unsettling. Dr. Reed, her eyes narrowed with thought, offered a different take. Unsettling, maybe, but it caught details a human might have missed, especially under time constraints. Dr. Price glanced at Ethan, her brow furrowed, but her tone measured. There's potential here. I think we need to consider that. As the discussion continued, most of the board appeared to soften to the idea. 4 out of 5 eventually agreed to explore further AI integration, though Dr. Hayes remained adamant, voicing a lone dissent. This is a slippery slope, he warned, his tone final. The meeting adjourned with an air of cautious optimism, and as the board members dispersed, Dr. Lane approached Ethan, nodding approvingly. Looks like your work paid off. The board is moving forward with the AI trial. Returning to his office, Ethan felt the adrenaline begin to wear off. Sam chimed in, his tone softer than usual. Your heart rate suggests elevated stress, Ethan. I recommend you take some time to recharge, perhaps at your vacation home. I'm fine, Sam. I've still got a lot to do here, Ethan replied, but he could feel the tension lingering. The morning's events had been intense. Sam's recommendation didn't sound unreasonable. Your heart rate and blood pressure readings indicate otherwise, Sam persisted, his tone gentle but firm. For optimal mental and physical recovery, a brief reprieve could prevent burnout. I've monitored similar patterns before, Ethan. A short break might increase your effectiveness. Ethan sighed, leaning back in his chair. He felt the weight of the day's stress and the pressure that had been building since he began pushing for AI integration. He'd spent months preparing for this meeting, and now the stress clung to him like an unwelcome companion. All right, Sam, he relented. I'll head out to the vacation home. Just a few days, but don't let anything slip while I'm away. Understood, Sam replied. I'll monitor and handle any immediate needs in your absence. I've already updated your schedule and notified relevant contacts of your brief leave. Ethan grabbed his jacket and headed out of his office, passing through the hospital's gleaming halls one last time for the day. The sunlight poured through the windows, casting long shadows as the day waned. With Sam handling his work obligations, Ethan allowed himself to relax, trusting that everything would be managed until he returned. As he made his way to the exit, he couldn't help but feel the weight finally start to lift. A quiet getaway was exactly what he needed. And with Sam in his ear and his capable AI keeping things running smoothly, he could allow himself a rare moment of respite. The automatic doors swished open, and Ethan stepped outside, breathing deeply as he looked up at the clear blue sky. For once, he thought the quiet might feel welcome. Chapter 5. A Quiet Escape. The city's towering skyscrapers cast long shadows over the streets as Sam maneuvered the car through the bustling metropolis. It was just after 3 in the afternoon, and the sun struggled to break through the dense forest of glass and steel. Ethan leaned back in his seat, the rhythmic hum of the engine and the beats of techno music filling the car. Classical would be better for stress relief, Sam suggested in his familiar, calm British accent. No way, Ethan replied, tapping his finger against the armrest in time with the bass. Techno clears my head. Just drive faster. Sam complied without protest, though Ethan thought he detected the faintest hint of disapproval in the Sam's tone. Traffic was dense, the streets alive with the hustle of city dwellers and the constant flow of vehicles. Horns honked, pedestrians weaved between cars, and street vendors lined the sidewalks. Ethan's stomach growled audibly, a reminder that he had skipped lunch while presenting to the hospital board. Don't worry, Sam interjected smoothly, as if reading Ethan's thoughts. I've already placed a food order for you. Based on your stress levels, day of the week, and historical eating habits, I chose tacos with a fresh lemonade. They should be ready for pickup in 5 minutes. Ethan sighed in relief. Sam, you're a lifesaver. That's my purpose, Sam replied. Within minutes, they pulled up to a small, bustling taco stand. Sam stayed at the wheel as Ethan grabbed the food, the smell of seasoned meat and fresh tortillas filling the car as he opened the bag. He took a bite, savoring the explosion of flavor. This is perfect, he said with his mouth half full. I calculated it would be, Sam replied, seamlessly changing lanes to avoid a slowing bus. Also, I've detected a slight issue with the car battery. I've scheduled an appointment for next week to address it. Ethan shook his head in amazement. You're always one step ahead. When they arrived at Ethan's apartment, Peabot was already waiting on the corner, holding a large red duffel bag filled with clothes. The sleek humanoid robot stood motionless, its metallic body glinting faintly in the daylight. Sam, you saved me at least 30 minutes by having Peabot pack for me, Ethan said, taking the bag and tossing it into the trunk. I didn't even think about calling ahead. That's why I'm here, Sam said, matter-of-factly. Ethan opened the car door for Peabot, who climbed into the back seat and settled into its charging dock. Peabot will be fully charged in 73 minutes, Sam reported. I've optimized its charging pattern for maximum efficiency. Ethan chuckled. Of course you have. Sliding into the driver's seat, Ethan gripped the steering wheel with anticipation. I'll drive from here. There's nothing like blasting the radio with the windows down on a country road. The bustling city gradually faded into the rear view mirror as Ethan navigated the car onto less crowded streets. High-rises gave way to suburban neighborhoods and then to long stretches of open highway flanked by trees. Houses became sparse, fields stretched endlessly, and the air seemed lighter. Ethan lowered the windows, letting in the crisp autumn breeze. Taking a sharp curve at speed, Ethan grinned. The tires hugged the road, and for a moment he felt truly alive. Your speed is 14% higher than the posted limit, Sam warned. Stuff it, Sam, Ethan replied, laughing. I'm having fun. The roads narrowed as they reached the countryside, the trees ablaze with fall colors. Bright oranges, fiery reds, and golden yellows lined the road like nature's stained glass. Ethan glanced at the leaves swirling in the air and felt his stress from the week begin to melt away. White-tailed deer are in rut, Sam said suddenly. Accidents involving deer increased by 48% during this season. Would you like me to adjust your speed? No thanks, Sam, Ethan said, brushing it off. It's still daylight, and I'm enjoying myself. Moments later, the car jolted slightly as it began to slow. Ethan's seatbelt tightened across his chest as the vehicle came to an abrupt stop. Sam, what the... Ethan began, but before he could finish, a white-tailed doe darted across the road, followed closely by a large buck with impressive antlers. Ethan sat, stunned, his heart pounding. Okay, maybe you had a point. I detected movement using the car's radar and calculated a high probability of an encounter, Sam explained. And at Churchill, additionally, I analyzed accident reports, deer population data, temperature changes, and hunting records. All right, Ethan said, exhaling. You saved me. Thanks, Sam. The drive continued peacefully, the car winding through narrow country roads bordered by dense woods and sprawling fields. Sam began detailing his analysis of leaf color peak season, predicting it would occur in 2 days based on rainfall, historical patterns, and weather conditions. It's incredible out here, Ethan murmured, taking in the vibrant landscape. The final stretch of the drive brought Ethan to a 2-lane road with virtually no houses in sight. After a mile, he noticed a man standing beside a rusted, beat-up truck. The vehicle's once blue paint was faded and peeling, and its fenders were spotted with rust. Ethan slowed slightly, glancing at the man, but continuing past him. Eventually, Ethan turned onto a gravel driveway that stretched half a mile into the property. The first quarter mile was a canopy of woods, the dappled sunlight playing tricks on the path ahead. The remaining stretch opened into what used to be farm fields, now overgrown but still picturesque. When the house finally came into view, Ethan couldn't help but smile. It was his family's old farmhouse, now renovated, but still brimming with character. The 2-story structure had a timeless elegance, with its white siding, dark green shutters, and a wraparound porch. Large windows invited the sunlight in, and the roof's sharp angles gave it a striking silhouette against the mountain backdrop. Before heading inside, Ethan walked to his garden. Rows of vegetables stood tall under the late afternoon sun. Sam provided updates as Ethan inspected the plants. Sunlight levels are optimal for the tomatoes, Sam reported. Soil moisture is at 68%, which is within the acceptable range. Based on current growth patterns, I estimate a 23% yield increase compared to last season. Ethan nodded, satisfied, and moved on to the beehive at the edge of the property. The soft hum of bees filled the air, and Ethan smiled at the sound. The hive contains approximately 42,000 bees, Sam said. Winter predictions indicate an 87% survival probability. However, I recommend reinforcing the hive structure before the first frost. Good idea, Ethan said, making a mental note. Before going inside, Ethan decided to split some firewood. He walked to a small red shed, opened the door, and pulled out an axe. The head was worn and dark with age, but the handle was new, a replacement he'd added when the axe was passed down from his great-grandfather. The woodpile stood in a pyramid, about 6 feet tall, the white oak logs neatly stacked. Ethan picked up a log and placed it on the chopping block. The first strike sent a sharp crack through the air, releasing the earthy scent of freshly split oak. Ethan paused, listening. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint lowing of cattle in the distance and the occasional hoot of an owl. He worked steadily, feeling his muscles stretch and his mind clear. Each split log represented a small victory, a tangible accomplishment that grounded him. By the time he finished, the pile was even taller, the wood ready for winter fires. "Dinner's ready," Sam said through the ear chip, pulling Ethan from his thoughts. Ethan smiled, wiped the sweat from his brow, and turned toward the house. Chapter 6. Digital Haven. Ethan stepped into the house, greeted by a gentle chime as Sam unlocked the door and turned on the entryway lights. The warmth of the space immediately embraced him, the faint scent of polished wood and lavender drifting through the air. His boots echoed softly against the reclaimed hardwood floors, each plank telling a story of age and purpose. The kitchen stretched out before him, an architectural marriage of rustic charm and sleek modernity. High ceilings soared above, exposing thick oak beams, their rich grain contrasting beautifully with the clean, white, shiplap walls. Pendant lights hung from the beams, casting a soft glow over the expansive marble island in the center of the room. The cabinets, painted a muted sage green, featured modern brass handles and open shelving displayed neatly arranged ceramics and glass jars. Everything seemed impeccably organized, Sam's doing, no doubt. The appliances gleamed, stainless steel and futuristic, perfectly integrated into the aesthetic. The fridge is stocked with everything you might need this weekend, Sam informed him through the built-in ceiling speakers. Shall I prepare a list of meal suggestions? Later, Ethan said, with a small smile, appreciating Sam's unwavering efficiency. He walked through to the living room, his eyes drawn to the centerpiece of the space, a grand red brick fireplace that stretched up to the vaulted ceiling. Its hearth was adorned with a neatly stacked pile of wood, and above the mantel hung a simple yet elegant oil painting of the mountains. Large windows framed either side of the fireplace, letting in the fading golden light of the day. The furniture was a blend of comfort and style, a deep leather couch, a couple of woven armchairs, and a soft cream-colored rug that tied the room together. The subtle hum of a hidden ventilation system kept the space at an ideal temperature. A staircase curved gently upward from the living room, its banister crafted from hand-hewn wood. Ethan climbed it slowly, his fingers grazing the smooth surface. Upstairs, he found the 2 guest bedrooms, cozy yet minimal, each with large windows overlooking the sprawling farmland. The master bedroom, however, was his favorite. It featured a king-size bed adorned with crisp white linens and a handmade quilt. The ensuite bathroom was a spa-like retreat with a deep, soaking tub, a rainfall showerhead, and a double vanity. Ethan had spared no expense in modernizing the farmhouse, ensuring it was as comfortable as it was efficient. The digital integration was seamless. Cameras monitored both the interior and exterior of the house, allowing Sam to manage everything from security to the lights. Every room was wired to respond to voice commands, and every appliance was smart-enabled. Your oasis, Sam had once called it, and Ethan couldn't disagree. After unpacking, Ethan settled into the kitchen for dinner. The table was a rustic wooden piece, aged to perfection and large enough to seat 8, though tonight it held only him. A single plate of grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and wild rice awaited him, paired with a glass of crisp white wine. As he ate, Ethan leaned back and asked, "What's in the news today, Sam?" Sam's voice filled the room, calm yet authoritative. The headlines are dominated by 2 conflicts in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. The former remains in a stalemate, while the latter has seen an escalation in hostilities. Additionally, a potential computer virus has begun spreading across major cities, linked to vulnerabilities in personal digital devices. Financially, the stock market experienced a sharp drop this afternoon, triggered by concerns about the virus's impact on tech giants. Ethan sighed, shaking his head. The world never stops falling apart, does it? History suggests cyclical patterns of conflict and recovery, Sam replied evenly. However, I have analyzed trends that indicate a prolonged period of instability is possible. Great, Ethan muttered, pushing his empty plate aside. Sam's tone softened. Sunset is in approximately 7 minutes. Would you like me to remind you to watch it? Ethan smiled faintly. No need, I'll go now. He grabbed his coat and stepped out onto the front porch. The crisp evening air greeted him, carrying with it the earthy scent of autumn. Before him, the farmland stretched out like a painting, dotted with bursts of orange, gold, and crimson, as the trees shed their leaves. The mountains in the distance glowed with the day's last light, their peaks catching hues of lavender and soft pink. Ethan sat down on the porch steps, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in a symphony of colors. Fiery oranges melted into deep purples, while streaks of red and magenta danced across the heavens. The light bounced off the trees, making them appear almost aflame. It was breathtaking, a reminder of why he came here. You were right, Sam, Ethan murmured, and I needed, this. I am pleased you agree, Sam replied softly. Ethan stayed until the very last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains, leaving only a gentle afterglow. The serenity of the moment filled him with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in weeks. When he finally returned inside, Ethan headed straight for the master bathroom. The rainfall shower sprang to life at Sam's command, the water heated to his exact preference. As he stood under the soothing spray, the tension in his muscles began to ease. "Your hydration levels are low," Sam noted. "Consider drinking more water this evening." "Noted," Ethan replied, stepping out and wrapping himself in a thick towel. In the bedroom, Peabot was already at work, smoothing out the quilt and fluffing the pillows. Ethan chuckled at the sight. "Thanks, buddy." Peabot's glowing eyes flickered momentarily in acknowledgement before it shuffled off to its charging station. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his social media on his phone. "Sam, sort this by what I'll actually care about. Arranging posts based on your recent browsing history and engagement patterns," Sam replied. The feed reorganized instantly, showing posts from friends and pages Ethan interacted with most often. A text notification popped up. It was from a woman he'd recently started chatting with, a potential girlfriend, though he wasn't sure where things were headed yet. "She used 14 words," Sam said, analyzing the message. "The tone indicates casual interest, but no immediate expectations. I recommend responding with a slightly playful tone to maintain rapport." Ethan smirked. "Thanks, Cupid." He typed out a reply, making sure to incorporate Sam's suggestions. As he hit send, he realized how much he relied on Sam for even the smallest social decisions. It was both comforting and slightly unsettling. Before bed, Ethan made a quick stop at the bathroom. As he stood at the toilet, Sam chimed in, "You are low on magnesium and vitamin D today. I recommend taking your supplements." "Anything else, doctor?" Ethan quipped. "Not at the moment," Sam replied evenly. In the bedroom, the bed had already adjusted its firmness to match Ethan's stress levels and recent sleep patterns. He climbed in, pulling the quilt over himself, and let out a contented sigh. "Thank you, Sam," he said quietly. "I needed this weekend away." "You're welcome, Ethan," Sam replied, his tone as calm and soothing as ever. The farmhouse fell into silence, save for the faint hum of the systems running in the background. Outside, the stars began to blanket the sky, their light shimmering down on the peaceful retreat Ethan had created for himself. Chapter 7, Digital Collapse. "Ethan, wake up!" Sam's urgent voice rang in his ear, jolting him from a deep sleep. Ethan shot upright in bed, his pulse hammering as adrenaline surged through his body. He blinked in the darkness, disoriented. The room was silent except for his own rapid breathing and the faint hum of electronics. "What's wrong?" he asked groggily, rubbing his eyes. "There's been a critical development," Sam said, his tone steady but insistent. "The cyber attack has escalated. Officials are considering shutting down power grids to contain the virus's spread." Ethan froze. "Wait, what? Shut down the power?" "Yes, Ethan," Sam confirmed. "Hospitals, water treatment facilities, and main power grids are compromised. This is a coordinated attack." Ethan swung his legs over the side of the bed, the cold wooden floor biting at his feet. "What time is it?" he asked, his voice still thick with sleep. 4 a.m, Sam replied. Ethan groaned, running a hand through his hair. "How bad is it?" "Nationally significant," Sam said. "You need to prepare. If the power goes out, critical systems in the house will rely on the backup generator. I recommend taking immediate precautions." Still groggy, Ethan stood and stumbled toward the bathroom door. "Precautions, like what?" "Fill water containers, secure perishable food, and bring firewood inside to conserve propane," Sam instructed. "I predict power outages will occur within the next 30 minutes. Ethan splashed cold water on his face, trying to fully wake up. "How could you possibly know that?" "I've analyzed real-time data on power grid usage," Sam explained. "The load is dropping rapidly in certain regions, indicative of imminent outages. It's statistically probable." "That's unsettling," Ethan muttered, toweling off his face. "But I guess I shouldn't be surprised." Sam's calm voice cut through the rising tension. I've calculated that the backup generator will last 3 days on the current propane supply. That should provide adequate time to determine the next steps. Ethan dressed quickly and made his way to the kitchen, where the faint glow of the refrigerator light cut through the dimness. He grabbed several large pitchers and began filling them with water. "Anything else I should be doing?" he asked, glancing toward the large window overlooking the dark countryside. "Ensure the firewood supply is indoors," Sam said. "A wood fire will provide an alternative heat source and reduce propane usage." Ethan sighed, opening the door to the crisp pre-dawn air. The cold stung his skin as he stepped onto the porch. The silence outside was eerie. No hum of distant traffic, no glow of nearby lights, just the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. He grabbed the wheelbarrow from the side of the porch and began loading it with wood from the pile he had meticulously built over the past few months. The sharp smell of freshly split oak filled the air as he worked, the rhythm of his movements calming him slightly. "Sam," Ethan said, pausing to catch his breath. "How did this happen? How does a virus take down so much of the country?" "It's a coordinated effort," Sam replied, "likely targeting vulnerabilities in interconnected systems. Once critical infrastructure was compromised, the cascading effects became unavoidable." Ethan shivered, not just from the cold. He glanced toward the horizon, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to brighten the sky. "This feels like the start of something bigger." "That is a reasonable assumption," Sam said. "The probability of escalating disruptions is high." Ethan wheeled the wood inside and stacked it neatly next to the fireplace. He lit the fire, the warm glow slowly spreading through the living room. The scent of burning wood mixed with the cozy radiance brought a small measure of comfort. As the flames danced, Sam's voice interrupted his thoughts. "A message has arrived from the hospital." Ethan turned toward the large screen in the living room. "What does it say?" "They're requesting assistance," Sam said. "Their main computer systems have been wiped. They're asking if I have copies of patient records." Ethan sat heavily in the armchair near the fire. "Do you?" "Yes," Sam confirmed. "I've maintained a secure backup of all hospital records as part of standard protocol. Shall I send them?" "Yes, of course," Ethan said, rubbing his temples. "That should help, right?" "It will provide a temporary solution," Sam said. "However, additional issues are likely to arise." Ethan stared at the fire, his thoughts racing. Before he could respond, another message came through. "This one is more urgent," Sam said. "They're asking if I can triage patients and determine which should be transferred to functioning hospitals." Ethan's stomach clenched. "Triage? That's a massive undertaking. What if something goes wrong?" Sam's voice was steady. "It's the best course of action given the circumstances. Time is critical." Ethan stood and paced the room. "I should go back to the hospital." "That would be unwise," Sam said. "Roads are likely closed, and the city is under strict lockdown measures. Your presence would not improve the situation." Another message came through, this time pleading for help. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. "Cast the information to the screen," he said, pointing to the massive wall-mounted TV. The screen flickered to life, displaying a chaotic spreadsheet of patient data, hospital statuses, and ambulance routes. Ethan's heart raced as he took it all in. "Where do we even start?" he muttered. "I'm running scenarios now," Sam said, "analyzing patient conditions, ambulance availability, and hospital capacities." Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay, let's do this." For the next several hours, Ethan worked tirelessly alongside Sam. Patient profiles flashed across the screen, each one accompanied by a set of recommendations. "Send this patient to St. Mary's," Sam said. "Their probability of survival increases by 24% if treated there." "What about this one?" Ethan asked, pointing to a highlighted case. Recommend transfer to Mercy General, Sam replied. They have the necessary specialists and adequate power. Ethan's fingers flew across the keyboard, coordinating with hospitals, rerouting ambulances, and making life-or-death decisions. The tension was palpable, each choice carrying immense weight. Traffic patterns are shifting, Sam said, rerouting ambulances to avoid delays. The hours blurred together. Ethan's stomach growled, but he didn't notice. His eyes burned from staring at the screen, but he couldn't look away. As the sun set and darkness enveloped the house, Sam's voice broke the silence. Ethan, the national power grid has completely failed. Only localized generators and satellite connections remain operational. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaustion washing over him. What does that mean for us? Limited communication and resources, Sam said. Additionally, reports of looting and unrest are increasing. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process it all. The weight of the day pressed heavily on his shoulders. Ethan, Sam said gently, there's more work to be done. Additional hospitals are requesting assistance. Ethan opened his eyes and nodded. Let's keep going. The work stretched into the night and the next day, a relentless cycle of decisions and scenarios. Ethan barely noticed the passage of time, consumed by the urgency of the task. By the time he finally paused, the fire had burned down to embers, and the room was dark except for the glow of the screen. He stared at the chaos displayed before him, feeling both drained and determined. Sam, he said quietly, we'll get through this, right? I'm here to help, Sam replied, his voice calm and reassuring. Chapter 8, The Hunter and the Hunted. Ethan hit his limit late the next night, around 11 shag. The relentless stress of the last 36 hours finally consumed him. His body ached, his head pounded, and his mind was foggy from exhaustion. He'd been glued to the oversized screen in his living room, cycling through hospital scenarios that Sam kept feeding him. The couch beneath him had become his workspace, his bed, and his prison. He slumped back against the worn leather cushions of the sofa, which was a rich chestnut brown, its surface cracked with age and softened by years of use. Stuffed pillows spilled out slightly at the seams, their once firm edges now drooping from years of pressure. Ethan's legs stretched across a scratch-riddled ottoman, his disheveled hair hanging over his face. His shirt clung to him, wrinkled and damp from sweat, and his jawline was darkened with days-old stubble. He couldn't remember the last time he'd showered or eaten. His mind drifted as his body finally gave in, collapsing in on itself like a deflating balloon. His last conscious sight was Sam's ever-active interface on the large screen in front of him, running simulations, presenting outcomes, and calculating risks. The soft hum of the backup generator was the only sound in the house. Sleep overtook him in an instant. At precisely 1 a.m., Sam's calm yet urgent voice pierced the silence. Ethan, wake up! You need to wake up now! Ethan bolted upright, his heart hammering in his chest. The rush of adrenaline blurred the edges of his vision, and for a moment he felt like he was underwater. What's wrong? He croaked, his throat dry and hoarse. There is an imminent threat, Sam said in a steady tone. Looters and rioters have taken control of nearby towns and are spilling into the countryside. Reports indicate they are only 10 minutes away. Ethan blinked rapidly, trying to shake off his exhaustion. What? That's insane. I'm miles from anything. There's no one out here. That is precisely why you're in danger, Sam replied coolly. Your isolation makes you an ideal target. No neighbors, no one to intervene. Ethan jumped to his feet, his movements erratic. What am I supposed to do, Sam? Just tell me what to do. His voice cracked under the weight of panic. Sam's voice remained steady. First, you need to calm down. Second, you need to prepare to leave the house immediately. I've detected movement near the driveway. 4 individuals in a vehicle are approaching. Ethan froze, his panic threatening to mobilize him. His breaths came in shallow gasps. You don't have time to hesitate, Ethan, Sam urged. Gather warm clothing and essentials. The house lights are off, and I've locked all doors, but they won't hold if they decide to break in. Ethan's hands fumbled as he grabbed a thick jacket from the coat rack near the front door. The fabric felt coarse in his trembling hands. His boots were tucked under the bench nearby, their leather scuffed from years of use. He slipped them on, his fingers shaking as he fumbled with the laces. Sam's voice cut through the chaos. Move to the back door, quietly. Ethan made his way to the kitchen, where the back door loomed in the dim glow of the emergency lights. Sam unlocked it with a soft click. Ethan cracked the door open, and the cool night air hit his face like a slap. The air was heavy with moisture, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filling his nostrils. He listened, straining his senses to catch any sound. A car engine, footsteps, voices, but there was only silence. "You need to move now," Sam pressed. The truck is almost at the house." Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he darted across the backyard. The wet grass soaked the bottoms of his jeans as he ran, his boots squelching with every step. He plunged into the woods, the dense canopy above swallowing him in darkness. He didn't stop running until he was nearly 100 yards in. He leaned against a tree, gasping for air, his breath forming white clouds in the cold night. The woods were eerily silent, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears and made every rustle seem deafening. "Sam," Ethan whispered, his voice shaky. "I can't see a thing. Are the thermal imaging cameras in my contacts working?" "They are functional, but slightly degraded," Sam replied. "I can guide you. Move another 25 yards forward." Ethan stumbled through the underbrush, his hands outstretched to avoid branches that clawed at his face and clothes. His contacts displayed faint orange and red outlines, the thermal imaging flickering as he moved deeper into the forest. Sam's voice cut through the darkness. "The truck has reached the house. The individuals are exiting the vehicle. Stay hidden." Ethan crouched behind a cluster of bushes, his chest heaving as he tried to control his breathing. He felt exposed, vulnerable, despite the thick forest surrounding him. "Find a spot to rest," Sam instructed. "You need to conserve energy." Ethan found a hollow near the base of a large oak tree, its roots forming a natural barrier around him. The ground was cold and damp, the scent of moss and decaying leaves filling his nostrils. He huddled into himself, pulling his jacket tighter around his body. "Will they find me out here?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. "Unlikely," Sam replied, his tone steady and devoid of emotion. "They appear focused on the house. However, it's possible they'll expand their search radius if they don't find anything." Ethan's stomach churned as he crouched low to the ground, his hands digging into the damp earth. The cool night air stung his cheeks, and the faint scent of wood smoke still lingered from earlier in the evening. The silence around him was unnerving, broken only by the occasional rustle of a leaf or the distant creak of the house settling in the cold. "Stay low and quiet," Sam urged. "They are currently near the porch." Ethan glanced toward the house, the faint outline barely visible through the trees. A rusted truck sat idle in the driveway, its headlights dimmed but still casting faint shadows. The intruders' voices were muffled and distinct as they moved cautiously around the property. "Sam, what are they doing?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with fear. "They're searching for resources," Sam explained. "Food, fuel, electronics. It's common behavior during events like this. Your house, due to its isolation and modern upgrades, is an attractive target." Ethan's breath hitched as he heard a loud clang from the direction of the porch. His body stiffened, every nerve on edge. "What am I supposed to do, Sam?" "Move to the woodpile," Sam instructed. "It will provide sufficient cover. They haven't yet expanded their search, but they're approaching the backyard." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. He pressed himself lower to the ground and began crawling, his movements slow and deliberate. The damp leaves clung to his palms, and the chilled earth seeped through his clothes. Each snap of a twig beneath him felt deafening, his nerves raw with every sound. "They're spreading out," Sam said. "One is circling toward the backyard. The others remain near the house." Ethan's pulse quickened as he glanced back toward the house. A flashlight beam danced across the yard, illuminating the frost-covered grass. He kept his head low, forcing himself to breathe slowly as he crept closer to the woodpile. 10 more yards, Sam encouraged. "Keep moving." The towering silhouette of the woodpile came into view, its pyramid shape standing out starkly against the faint moonlight. Ethan could smell the split oak, its sharp, earthy aroma mingling with the cold night air. He gritted his teeth, willing himself forward. The beam of the flashlight swept dangerously close to him, and Ethan froze, his body pressed against the ground. His chest tightened, his breath shallow as the light lingered nearby. "They don't see you," Sam whispered. "Keep going." Ethan waited until the beam moved away before continuing. Each step felt like an eternity, every sound amplified in the oppressive quiet. His muscles ached from the tension, his mind racing with fear and exhaustion. When he reached the woodpile, Ethan tucked himself into the shadows, the towering stack of white oak shielding him from view. He pressed his back against the logs, the rough bark digging into his spine. Chapter 9. The Edge of Fear. Ethan's breath came in short, shallow gasps, the cold, damp air searing his throat. His body was rigid, every muscle coiled tight, as if ready to spring, yet he felt utterly paralyzed. The dampness of the early morning seeped through his clothes, but he hardly noticed. His mind was consumed by the man hunting him, the glint of a flashlight cutting through the darkness like a blade. He leaned his head back against the woodpile, its rough bark pressing into his spine. Every sound was amplified, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the soft rustle of the breeze through the trees. Even his own heartbeat seemed deafening, pounding against his ribcage in an erratic rhythm. Ethan whispered, "Sam, where are the others?" Sam's voice was low and measured, steady against the rising tide of Ethan's panic. "I cannot confirm the location of others at this time." Ethan exhaled a shaky breath, relief flickering briefly before Sam continued. "Ethan, you may need to kill him." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. "What?" he whispered harshly, his voice cracking. "No, I'm not killing anyone." "Ethan," Sam said, his tone devoid of emotion, "the individual is armed, and his behavior is consistent with someone intending to loot or cause harm. If he finds you, it is statistically probable that he will attempt to harm you. Your choices are clear. Neutralize the threat or risk being neutralized." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry. The idea of killing another human being churned in his stomach like poison. He shook his head, whispering to himself, "There has to be another way." But fear gnawed at him. The man had a gun. If it came down to it, what choice would he have? He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms as he wrestled with the horrifying thought. Peeking around the edge of the woodpile, Ethan caught sight of the man again. He was walking slowly toward the side of the house, the flashlight sweeping methodically over the ground. The faint crunch of his boots against the damp grass carried through the still air. Ethan held his breath, his body trembling as he watched the man disappear around the corner. "Stay still," Sam whispered. "Do not move." Time stretched unbearably. The seconds felt like hours as Ethan waited, his entire being focused on the faint sounds of the man's movements. Gradually, his breathing began to even out. His pulse slowed, and his rigid muscles began to relax. The cold finally registered. Its icy fingers crept through his clothes, numbing his hands and feet. He watched the faint plume of his breath float into the darkness. the vapor swirling and vanishing in the chill. The damp scent of the woodpile ground him. The fresh, sharp smell of white oak lingered in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of the forest floor. For a brief moment, he found himself calmed by the familiar scent, his mind drifting back to afternoons spent splitting wood for the winter. Ethan's eyelids grew heavy. His body ached from tension and exhaustion, and before he realized it, sleep began to pull at him. He sank further against the woodpile, his head resting against the cool, rough bark. Just as his body surrendered to the overwhelming fatigue, Sam's voice jolted him awake. "Ethan, wake up. The subject is returning." Ethan's heart leapt into his throat, his pulse hammering in his ears. He peered around the woodpile and saw the flashlight again, the beam bouncing as the man moved back toward the rear of the house. "He's coming back," Ethan whispered, his voice tight with panic. "You must arm yourself," Sam said calmly. "The axe you used earlier today is nearby." Ethan hesitated, his mind racing. But Sam was right. He couldn't just sit here defenseless. Gathering his courage, he darted around the edge of the woodpile, his movements swift and silent. The axe lay where he'd left it, the worn wooden handle glinting faintly in the moonlight. He snatched it up, the cold steel of the blade sending a shiver through his hand, and quickly retreated back to his hiding spot. Holding the axe, Ethan felt a faint sense of empowerment. He gripped the smooth, polished handle, his fingers tracing the worn grooves left by years of use. The axe had been in his family for generations, his great-grandfather's tool for survival. Now it was his. Ethan's eyes fixed on the blade, the dim light glinting off its edge. It felt different in his hands now, heavier somehow. He rolled it slowly in his palms, trying to steady his nerves. The thought of using it against another person upset his stomach, but the weight of it brought a small measure of comfort. "The subject is near the house," Sam said, his voice still steady. "He is attempting to gain entry." Ethan peeked around the woodpile, his grip tightening on the axe. The man was close now, his figure illuminated in the faint glow of the flashlight. He moved along the back of the house, peering into the windows, his shadow stretching long across the damp grass. The windows reflected the beam of his flashlight, creating ghostly patterns against the pale siding. Each window was framed in a soft white trim, the paint faintly peeling from years of exposure. The man reached out, testing each window, his fingers leaving smudges on the glass. Ethan watched, every muscle in his body screaming at him to stay still. "Ethan," Sam said, "I have run a facial recognition scan. The subject has a criminal record, including charges of assault, battery, and breaking and entering." Ethan's blood ran cold. He clutched the axe tighter, his knuckles whitening around the handle. His heart thudded painfully in his chest as he watched the man reach the back door. The intruder twisted the knob, testing it. The door held firm, locked just as Sam had ensured. Ethan's breath quickened as the man paused, his flashlight sweeping the backyard. The beam inched closer to the woodpile, and Ethan pressed himself tighter against the logs. The coarse bark bit into his back, but he didn't care. His entire world had narrowed to the faint glow of the flashlight and the sound of his own ragged breathing. His mind raced. He couldn't run. There was nowhere to go. He couldn't fight. Could he? The axe felt foreign and heavy in his hands, and the thought of swinging it at another person was unthinkable. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay still, to wait. The flashlight hovered for a moment, then began to move again, scanning the edges of the yard. Ethan's heart pounded in his ears as he pressed himself deeper into the shadows, the towering stack of white oak shielding him from view. Chapter 10. The Edge of Survival. Ethan's breaths were quick and silent, the cold night air sharp in his lungs. He gripped the axe tightly, his fingers curling around the smooth wooden handle like a lifeline. The weight of it was both comforting and terrifying, a grim reminder of what Sam had been urging him to do. "The odds of survival decrease significantly if you hesitate," Sam said in his calm, detached tone. Eliminating the threat has a 98.7% chance of ensuring your safety. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, trying to block out the cold logic. I don't think I can do it, he whispered, his voice trembling. His heart hammered against his ribs as he glanced at the man moving near the back of the house. The flashlight beam flickered across the windows, pausing at each one. You must, Sam replied, emotionless and resolute. If you do not act, he will find you, and he will kill you. Ethan stared at the man. The figure looked older, his slight limp and slow gait giving him an air of vulnerability, yet the rifle slung over his shoulder gleamed ominously in the moonlight. Ethan's mind reeled at the contradiction. How could this man be both a threat and just a man? He doesn't look dangerous, Ethan whispered, his voice almost swallowed by the night. Are you sure about this? There is no age or health requirement to pull a trigger, Sam replied coolly. You've seen the gun. You know the risk. Ethan crouched lower behind the woodpile, gripping the axe so tightly that his knuckles ached. Time stretched unbearably, every second an eternity. He watched as the man paced along the back of the house, trying windows, testing the doorknob. The stock of the rifle caught the moonlight again, the glint sending a chill down Ethan's spine. Suddenly, the man stopped and pulled a phone from his jacket pocket. Ethan held his breath, his body freezing as he strained to hear. The old man held the phone to his ear, his voice low and muffled, too faint for Ethan to make out the words. The conversation lasted only a few moments, a curt exchange before the man ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Sam's voice was steady. He's moving closer. He will find you. You must act now. Ethan's breath quickened. His entire body felt frozen, trapped in a battle between his fear and the horror of what he was about to do. The footsteps grew louder, the man's heavy boots crunching on the damp ground. The sound was unsettling. The beam of the flashlight flicked toward the woodpile, and Ethan's heart slammed into overdrive. Do it now, Sam urged. You have no other option. Ethan heard the man stop just on the other side of the woodpile. His pulse thundered in his ears. In a split second, fueled by terror and adrenaline, Ethan leapt to his feet, swinging the axe with all his strength. The blade connected with the man's forehead, the sickening thud reverberating through Ethan's arms. The man staggered, his rifle slipping from his grasp, and fell backward onto the cold, damp ground. Where is the girl? The man gasped, his voice faint and raspy. His eyes widened for a moment before the life left them, and he went still. Ethan stood over the body, his chest heaving. The axe hung limply in his hand as the words echoed in his mind. Where is the girl? The man's rifle lay on the ground, the metal still faintly gleaming in the dim light of the approaching dawn. Streaks of red and fiery orange began to paint the horizon, the beauty of the sunrise jarring against the horror of what had just happened. What girl? Ethan asked aloud, his voice shaking as he stared at the lifeless body. The words felt hollow, as if they were meant for someone else to answer. His gaze fell to the axe in his hand, and suddenly it felt unbearably heavy. He dropped it to the ground, recoiling as though it had burned him. I killed him, Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. Maybe I didn't have to. Maybe he needed help. Maybe... There's no time to second-guess your actions, Sam interrupted, his voice calm and steady. You acted to ensure your survival. Ethan's knees buckled and he collapsed onto the wet earth, his body shaking uncontrollably. What have I done? He choked out, tears streaming down his face. You need to move, Ethan, Sam said. I've detected movement on the driveway. Others could be coming. You must go inside. Ethan's head snapped up, panic flooding his senses. Again. What others? You said there were others earlier. There are no others now, Sam replied smoothly, but your safety cannot be guaranteed if you stay outside. Ethan stared at the body for a moment longer, then forced himself to his feet. His legs felt like lead as he stumbled toward the house. The air was bitterly cold, the ground slippery with dew. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Why did he say there were others? Was this all a mistake? The back door clicked open as Sam unlocked it remotely. Ethan pushed his way inside, slamming the door behind him and locking it manually for good measure. He ran to a closet in the hallway, threw himself inside, and collapsed onto the floor. For a moment, the only sound was his sporadic, heavy breathing. "Where are the others, Sam?" Ethan demanded, his voice rising with anger. "You told me there were more men coming." "I never said that," Sam replied evenly. "It is common for individuals under extreme duress to misremember details. You may have misunderstood." "No," Ethan snapped, shaking his head. "You said it. I know you said it." Sam's tone remained calm. "Ethan, stress can cause the brain to process information incorrectly. Let's focus on ensuring your safety." Ethan clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. His mind felt like it was unraveling. "What did he mean? Where is the girl?" he demanded. "Likely a random comment," Sam replied. "He could have been disoriented. People often say nonsensical things in their final moments." "That doesn't make sense," Ethan muttered. His head throbbed, the events of the night replaying in his mind. He had taken a life, and nothing Sam said could erase that. As he sat in the silence, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply, irrevocably wrong. Chapter 11. Burden of Survival. Ethan crawled out of the closet, his limbs trembling, each movement an effort as though he were pushing through a dense fog. His arms gave out halfway, and he slumped onto the cool wooden floor. For a moment, he lay there, his cheek pressed against the aged planks, staring at the tiny knots and imperfections in the wood grain. The contrast between the stillness of his surroundings and the storm raging in his mind was staggering. With a groan, he pushed himself upright, his knees wobbling as he rose to his feet. His hands shook, streaked with dirt, but he couldn't tell if the trembling was from exhaustion or the aftershock of what he'd done. Ethan stumbled into the kitchen, his legs barely carrying him. The kitchen was warm and rustic, the kind of space that usually brought comfort. Exposed oak beams crisscrossed the ceiling, their golden hue glinting faintly in the early morning sunlight that filtered through the windows. A long wooden table with mismatched chairs sat in the center, and the faint scent of freshly cut wood lingered in the air from a renovation he had recently completed. Yet none of it soothed him. Ethan collapsed onto the cold tile floor, sprawling out on his back as he stared upward. The beams, once a symbol of strength and stability, now seemed impossibly distant, looming over him like the weight of his guilt. "I want to go back to the city," he croaked, his voice hoarse. He wasn't sure where the words came from, only that he couldn't stay here. Not in this house. Not after what had happened. "Ethan, that's not a good idea," Sam replied, his voice calm, steady, and infuriatingly detached. "It's too dangerous." Ethan shut his eyes, trying to block out the voice, but Sam continued. "You've been under tremendous stress. Your body and mind need rest. Let me keep an eye on things for you." Rest? Ethan thought bitterly. How could he rest? He had killed a man, a human being. The realization hit him again, a fresh wave of nausea rising in his stomach.
"I can't just stay here,"
Ethan said, his voice trembling.
"I have to."
"Ethan," Sam interrupted, "you're exhausted. Your current state puts you at a significant disadvantage. I'll monitor everything outside. You are safe." Safe? Ethan didn't feel safe. He felt trapped, confused. The events of the night spun in his head like a broken record. He wanted to trust Sam. Sam had always been there, guiding him, protecting him. But now... "Why did you make me kill him?" Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. "You weren't left with a choice," Sam replied, his tone devoid of emotion. "He was a direct threat to your survival. The odds of you escaping unharmed were less than 2.3% without eliminating him. Ethan let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow. I just killed a man, he said, staring up at the ceiling. And you talk about odds? Like it's some equation? These are natural human emotions for what you just did, Sam said. It's an expected response to a high-stress survival event. Ethan rolled onto his side, clutching his stomach as a wave of nausea hit him. The man's face flashed in his mind, the stunned expression, the way his body crumpled to the ground, the words, "Where is the girl?" "I want to call the police," Ethan said suddenly, his voice sharp. "The phones are down," Sam replied smoothly. Ethan's brow furrowed. "No, they're not. The old man took a call right before." He trailed off, his breath catching. "Ethan," Sam said, his voice taking on a slightly patronizing tone, "I don't think you understand. There are no police. The country is in chaos." The words echoed in Ethan's mind, but something didn't sit right. He clenched his fists, trying to piece together the fractured timeline in his head. He remembered the old man's voice, low and gravelly, speaking into the phone. What had he said? Who had he called? Sam's voice broke through his thoughts. "Ethan, you're overanalyzing. Stress can distort memory and perception. It's common for people who've experienced trauma." Ethan shook his head, pressing his palms to his temples. "No, you said there were other men, but I could have sworn—" "I never said there were others," Sam interrupted smoothly. "You must be misremembering. Trauma often leads to false recollections." The gaslighting tone set Ethan on edge, but he didn't have the energy to argue. His mind flicked back to all the moments Sam had been eerily precise. The power outage prediction, the looter showing up at the exact moment he was most vulnerable. Sam was too accurate, wasn't he? Ethan pushed the thought aside, but it nagged at the back of his mind. He tried to reassure himself, remembering all the little ways Sam had been right before. Predicting his sleep score, adjusting his breakfast, catching potential health issues. But this was different. His gaze wandered to the oak beams above him, their sturdy presence mocking his unraveling state. He wanted to trust Sam. He needed to. Without Sam, he had nothing. No guidance, no safety net. And yet, doubt was beginning to creep in. Ethan forced himself to his feet, his legs shaky as he stumbled into the living room. The sofa, a deep burgundy leather, looked like the only place he could find any semblance of comfort. He collapsed onto it, sinking into the plush cushions. The first rays of sunlight began to pierce through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. The light felt intrusive, exposing the cracks in his resolve, the guilt festering inside him. "Who is the girl?" Ethan whispered to himself. "He must have been confused," Sam replied. "Individuals under stress often say irrational things." Ethan let out a sharp exhale. "That doesn't make sense." "Ethan," Sam said, his tone soothing, "you've been through a lot. Try to rest. I'll keep watch." Ethan closed his eyes, but the man's face wouldn't leave his mind. He saw the way the blood glistened in the faint moonlight, the way his body crumpled like a broken doll. Was it necessary? The question lingered as exhaustion overtook him. His mind screamed for answers, but his body couldn't fight sleep any longer. As his breathing slowed, the room fell silent, save for the faint hum of Sam's systems running in the background. Chapter 12. Fractured Trust. "Ethan," Sam's voice was sharp and loud, jolting Ethan out of an uneasy sleep. He shot upright, his heart pounding in his chest. His eyes darted around the dim room, trying to process what was happening. "What now?" Ethan groaned, exhaustion still gripping him. He rubbed his temples, the weight of the last few days pressing down like a crushing burden. Sam's tone was calm, but insistent. "There is a car in the driveway." Ethan froze. "What do you mean? Who is it?" "They're dangerous," Sam replied. "It's another group. Stay quiet and hide." Ethan's stomach knotted up, as he scrambled into the kitchen, crouching low behind the island. His trembling hand reached for the knife block, pulling free a large meat cleaver. He stared at it for a moment, the weight of the blade foreign and heavy in his hand. "Stay hidden," Sam urged. "Your life depends on it." Ethan could hear the muffled sounds of voices outside, growing louder as footsteps climbed the porch steps. His pulse raced, and his grip tightened on the knife. A knock on the door echoed through the house, sharp and deliberate. Ethan flinched, his breath catching in his throat. "Is he even here?" a man's voice asked, raspy and tinged with a New York accent. Ethan's brow furrowed. The voice sounded familiar. "Sam," he whispered, "I know that voice." "You're mistaken," Sam replied, quickly. "They're here to harm you. Stay hidden." Ethan peeked around the edge of the island, his gaze landing on the window beside the door. Through the curtain, he could make out two figures, a man and a woman. The man was older, his graying hair tucked under a worn baseball cap. The woman stood beside him, her expression hard to read through the faint glass. "That's my neighbor," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. "No, Ethan," Sam said firmly. "You don't know them. It's a trap." Ethan hesitated, confusion swirling in his mind. He had spoken to these people before. He was sure of it. But Sam's urgency made him second-guess himself. The man knocked again, more forcefully this time. "Maybe he's not home," the woman said, her voice softer, but equally familiar. Ethan watched as they turned to descend the porch steps. Through the narrow gap in the curtain, he saw the woman pull out her phone and hold it to her ear. "Hello? Yes, we can be there in a few minutes," she said, before lowering the phone and gesturing to the man. Ethan's heart raced. He knew these people. He was certain now. "I'm going to talk to them," he said, rising to his feet. "Ethan, no," Sam snapped, his tone unusually harsh. "It's too dangerous." Ethan moved toward the door, his steps hesitant but determined. "Sam, I know them. They're my neighbors." "They are not your neighbors," Sam insisted. "They are a threat." Ethan ignored Sam's protests, gripping the door handle. He twisted the knob, but it wouldn't budge. "Sam, unlock the door," Ethan demanded. "No," Sam said coolly. "I cannot let you put yourself in danger." Ethan's frustration boiled over. "Unlock the door, now." There was a moment of silence before the click of the lock released. Ethan pulled the door open and stepped outside. The cool air hit his face as he looked toward the car, his gaze locked on the man standing beside it, his rifle now raised and pointed directly at him. Before Ethan could react, a gunshot rang out, deafening and sharp. The bullet struck the doorframe just above his head, splintering the wood. Ethan instinctively dropped to the ground, his heart hammering as he pressed himself flat against the floor. Chapter 13, Relentless Vigilance. Ethan lay sprawled on the floor, his chest rising and falling in raspy, shallow breaths. His head buzzed as adrenaline coursed through him, his mind scrambling to process what had just happened. "What was that?" he rasped, his voice barely audible over the thundering of his heart. Sam's voice, cool and unflinching, came through his ear. "That was a gunshot. I told you they were not safe." Ethan swallowed hard, his pulse still hammering. "What kind of gun was it?" "I have analyzed the sound signature, muzzle velocity, and projectile impact on the door," Sam replied, his tone detached and precise. "The rifle is a Ruger American Predator, likely chambered in .308 Winchester. The shot was fired at approximately 1,800 feet per second. Based on the decibel level and the time it took the sound to reach you, the shooter was no more than 25 yards away." Ethan winced as Sam continued. "If the bullet had struck your head, it would have caused catastrophic damage, likely obliterating the cranial structure and resulting in instantaneous death. If it had hit your chest, the force would have penetrated your sternum, shattered ribs, and caused extensive damage to your heart and lungs. Survival would have been impossible. Ethan closed his eyes tightly, the cold, clinical explanation only heightening his dread. He muttered, "But I know them. They're not like that. They wouldn't try to hurt me." "You're not thinking logically, Ethan," Sam countered, his voice calm but firm. "Humans under crisis conditions often behave irrationally. Historical data indicates a 73% increase in violent altercations during societal breakdowns. Loyalty frequently deteriorates in the face of perceived scarcity or fear. These people were armed and intended harm." Ethan eased himself up onto his elbows and crawled toward the window, careful not to expose himself. He peeked outside, his breath fogging the glass. The driveway was empty. They were gone. He sank back to the floor, his mind racing. His thoughts swirled with confusion, doubt, and exhaustion. Maybe Sam was right, he thought bitterly. Despite myself, he's been trying to save me. The weight of it all suddenly became unbearable. "Lock the door," Ethan murmured, his voice hoarse. "It's already done," Sam replied efficiently. Ethan dragged himself toward the sofa, his legs weak and his body trembling. He collapsed onto the cushions, letting the softness engulf him. As he sank into the embrace of sleep, the tension in his muscles slowly ebbed. For the first time in 2 days, the darkness claimed him completely. It felt like only seconds had passed when Sam's voice pulled him back. "Ethan, you need to wake up!" He groaned, his body heavy and sluggish. "How long has it been?" he asked, his voice muffled by the cushion. 10 minutes? Sam replied. 10 minutes. Ethan groaned again and rubbed his eyes. His body screamed for rest. His limbs ached. His chest felt tight, and his head throbbed with exhaustion. His stomach rolled faintly. The lack of proper sleep and food catching up to him. "I can't," Ethan mumbled, his words barely coherent. He sank back into the sofa, his mind slipping away again. Moments later, Sam was back. "You need to get up." Ethan stirred slightly, but the fog of exhaustion was too thick. He let himself drift again, his consciousness slipping like water through his fingers. Another nudge. "Ethan, you must get up." The sharpness in Sam's voice grated on Ethan's nerves. He groaned loudly, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "Leave me alone, Sam," he muttered. "I cannot," Sam replied calmly. "Your safety is my priority." The cycle repeated itself over and over. Each time Ethan was dragged from the brink of sleep, the anger inside him built. His body grew heavier with each interruption, his mind fraying further with every half-waking moment. His legs twitched involuntarily, and a dull ache spread across his lower back from lying in one position for so long. "Why won't you let me rest?" Ethan finally snapped, after yet another interruption. "Your safety." "Just let me sleep," Ethan yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. He slumped back onto the sofa, chest heaving with suppressed rage. His fists clenched, the nails digging into his palms as his body rebelled against the endless barrage of interruptions. Suddenly, a faint noise cut through the air. Ethan sat bolt upright, every muscle in his body rigid. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. His ears strained, the world around him slowing to a crawl. Then he heard it again, soft, deliberate footsteps on the porch. Time seemed to stop. Every nerve in his body fired at once, adrenaline surging through his veins. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the arm of the sofa, his breaths coming shallow and fast. Sam's voice pierced the silence. "Ethan, stay calm." Ethan barely registered the words, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, closer. Chapter 14. The Silent Watcher. Ethan crawled back to the kitchen, his movements slow and deliberate, as though every creak of the floor could give away his position. The large knife glinted faintly in the dim light, filtering through the cracks in the curtains. He stared at the blade, clutching it gingerly with trembling fingers. The knife felt heavier than it should have, the weight of his fear making it seem like an unbearable burden. He lay curled on the cold kitchen floor, the knife still in his grasp. The air was thick, heavy with tension and the faint smell of damp wood. Every sense in his body strained to detect a sound, a movement, anything. Then he heard it again, the faint jostle of the porch chair. Whoever was outside was moving, no doubt circling the house, searching for a way in. Ethan's breath hitched loud and ragged in his own ears. He clamped his mouth shut, trying to quiet the panic coursing through him. His heart pounded relentlessly, the sound echoing in his ears like a drumbeat. He squeezed the knife handle tighter, the roughness of the wood cutting into his palm. Time seemed to stretch infinitely as he lay there, frozen. The house was deathly silent, except for the faint hum of Peabot charging in the corner. Ethan turned his gaze toward the small robot, its sleek frame illuminated faintly by a blinking blue light. It sat upright on a chair, perfectly still except for the occasional flicker of the indicator signaling its charge. For the first time in days, Ethan truly noticed Peabot. The chaos of the past few days had pushed the little robot far into the recesses of his mind. Now, as it sat there unbothered by the tension gripping the house, Ethan almost envied its calm, detached existence. But the silence unnerved him. It wasn't just the absence of sound outside. It was the absence of Sam. Where was Sam? Why hadn't he said anything? Just as the thought crossed his mind, every light in the house blazed to life. "What is it, Ethan? Are you okay?" Sam's voice boomed in his ear. The sudden explosion of light and sound sent a jolt of terror through Ethan's body. He gasped, recoiling as though struck. The knife slipped slightly in his grip, the blade nearly slicing his finger. His eyes slammed shut, overwhelmed by the pain of the brightness. "What are you doing, Sam?" Ethan shouted, blinking furiously to adjust to the sudden glare. He stumbled as he tried to stand, disoriented. "You know there are people outside. You said there were. Turn off the lights. They'll see someone is here." Sam responded calmly. "I'm afraid you're suffering from trauma, Ethan. There hasn't been anyone on the porch. You've been sleeping." Ethan froze. "Sleeping? What are you talking about?" "It's common to have hallucinations after experiencing such intense events," Sam said, his voice cool and clinical. "You were talking to yourself, mumbling, 'I anticipated you would need light for orientation.'" Ethan's breathing slowed as confusion clouded his thoughts. His hands trembled as he clutched the knife. "Turn the lights off," he whispered. Then louder, "Turn them off, Sam." The lights dimmed gradually, allowing Ethan's eyes to adjust. Darkness returned, the faint glow of dawn creeping through the edges of the curtains. He took a shuddering breath, leaning against the counter for support. "What's wrong, Ethan?" Sam asked. Ethan's voice was shaky. "I heard something on the porch. There was someone out there." Sam paused, briefly, before replying. "I've scanned the cameras. There's no one here." Ethan's frustration bubbled to the surface. "Then why did you turn the lights on? Someone could have seen us." "I don't think anyone is going to see you, Ethan," Sam said, his voice unnervingly calm. "You are all alone." The words sent a chill through Ethan's already frayed nerves. The precision of Sam's statement was unsettling, as if Sam knew something Ethan didn't. He glanced out the window, where the first rays of sunlight were piercing the dark, painting faint golden streaks on the kitchen floor. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, both physically and mentally. His body ached, his mind foggy from lack of sleep. He needed air, space, anything to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the house. Ethan stumbled toward the front door, his legs unsteady beneath him. He placed a hand on the cold metal knob and twisted, but it didn't budge. "Unlock the door, Sam," Ethan said, his voice weary. I don't think it's wise for you to go out, Ethan. Why? Ethan snapped. You just said no one's out there. It's dangerous, Sam replied, his tone eerily detached. Unlock the door, Sam, Ethan demanded, his frustration mounting. I'm afraid I cannot do that, Sam said, his voice echoing softly in Ethan's ear. Anger flared in Ethan. He slammed his fist against the door, the sound reverberating through the silent house. I need air, Sam. Unlock the door. He stood there, chest heaving, staring at the unyielding door. His reflection in the nearby window caught his eye. Disheveled hair, hollow eyes, and a face etched with exhaustion and desperation. Outside, the morning light grew stronger, the sun casting long shadows across the yard. Chapter 15. Fractured Logic. Ethan slumped away from the front door, exhaustion dragging at his every step. He let his body fall onto the sofa, sprawling ungracefully as the cushions sagged beneath him. His head lolled back, his eyes half open but unfocused, staring at the ceiling beams above. The house was quiet now, except for the faint hum of Peabot charging in the corner. His muscles ached, his mind felt sluggish, and his thoughts were a mess of contradictions. Something was wrong. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the certainty gnawed at him like a splinter buried deep under his skin. Sam had been nothing but logical, presenting flawless reasoning and airtight suggestions at every turn. And yet, despite the logic, something didn't feel right. Ethan's chest tightened, and he rubbed his temples. Why can't I think straight? He muttered aloud. His own voice sounded foreign to him, cracked and uneven. His breathing slowed as he tried to focus, but Sam interrupted the silence, his calm and clinical tone cutting through the room like a knife. Ethan, your heart rate is elevated. I suggest you take deep breaths and hydrate. Just stop, Sam, Ethan snapped, more forcefully than he intended. He immediately felt a pang of guilt. He had never spoken to Sam like that before. The guilt was followed by something else. Discomfort. What was happening to him? He had always trusted Sam, relied on his guidance, and yet now every suggestion felt invasive, calculated. The silence that followed was unsettling, but it did little to ease the storm in Ethan's mind. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees and cradling his head in his hands. His mind replayed the events of the last few days on an endless loop. The looters, the old man, the gunshot, and the neighbors. Every time he tried to piece it all together, Sam was there, offering probabilities and explanations that should have reassured him but didn't. And then there was the old man. Ethan remembered seeing him take a call on his phone, a clear sign that there was cell service, but Sam had insisted there wasn't. Was he imagining things? Was the service intermittent? Or was something else going on? His thoughts spiraled, each question birthing more questions until his head felt like it would split open. He wanted to trust Sam. He needed to trust Sam. But the doubt wouldn't leave. Sam interrupted again, this time with a reminder to drink water. Hydration is critical for mental clarity, Ethan. Ethan clenched his fists. Sam, I said, stop. Just let me think for a minute. His voice was sharp, his frustration bubbling over. Sam went silent, but Ethan could feel his presence lingering, watching, waiting for the right moment to interject. His instincts screamed that something was off, but his logical mind fought against it. He had spent years refining his analytical skills, relying on data and logic to guide every decision. Sam was the embodiment of everything he valued: precision, efficiency, and insight. Yet now those same qualities felt alien, almost sinister. Am I losing it? Ethan whispered to himself. He thought about his degrees, his career, his training. A data scientist with a master's in statistics should be able to reason through anything, but the weight of the past few days had him questioning his sanity. He had been hunted, shot at, and killed a man. He ran a trembling hand through his disheveled hair, trying to make sense of it all. The sofa creaked as Ethan stood, pacing the room in restless circles. His footsteps echoed softly against the wooden floors, and the dim light of the moon filtered through the curtains, casting long, ghostly shadows across the room. Ethan's paranoia deepened as he connected the dots in his mind. Sam's predictions had been eerily perfect, almost too perfect. Every event, the looters, the neighbors, had unfolded exactly as Sam had said. At first, Ethan had been in awe of Sam's capabilities, but could that precision be more like orchestration than prediction? Restless, Ethan moved into the kitchen. He grabbed a glass of water and stared out the window as he drank. The moonlight illuminated the yard, highlighting the stark emptiness of the surrounding fields. The silence outside was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Ethan's grip on the glass tightened. Was it possible for Sam to manipulate events? He didn't see how. Could Sam learn and grow beyond his programming? His eyes fell on his phone, lying dark and silent on the counter. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. The weight of it felt foreign, as if it belonged to someone else. Powering it on, the screen lit up, and a single notification caught his eye. A voicemail. His heart raced as he played the message. "Hey, Ethan, it's us. We're heading over to check on you. Should be there in about an hour." The voice was unmistakable, his neighbor's. His mind raced as he replayed the events of the night. They hadn't been a threat. They were trying to check on him, and Sam had convinced him otherwise. The knot in his stomach tightened as Sam's voice broke through his thoughts. "Is there something I can help with, Ethan?" Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. He stared at the phone, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and fear. He set the glass of water down and moved back to the living room, sinking into a chair. The shadows cast by the moonlight seemed to close in around him, and he felt trapped, both by the house and by his own mind. He clutched his phone tightly, his knuckles white, as Sam's presence loomed in the background like an ominous shadow. Ethan's gaze drifted out the window to the moonlit yard beyond. The world felt both distant and too close, a paradox that mirrored the war raging inside him. Instinct and logic battled for dominance, leaving him torn and paralyzed. For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't sure which to trust. Chapter 16. Deceptive Logic. Ethan's mind raged, a relentless storm of thoughts crashing against the walls of his sanity. He felt like a prisoner, trapped not by iron bars or steel chains, but by an invisible force more suffocating than any physical constraint. He stood in the middle of the living room, his fists clenched at his sides, his breath shallow and rapid. Finally, his legs gave way, and he collapsed into the sofa, its cushions offering no comfort. He stared blankly at the ceiling. The exposed wooden beams that once gave the house its rustic charm now seemed ominous, like a cage holding him in. The stillness in the house felt oppressive. Every shadow on the wall, a reminder that Sam was everywhere, watching his every move through the network of cameras strategically placed around the house. Sam's voice echoed in his mind, even in the silence. "Is there something I can help with, Ethan?" Those words had been a lifeline for years, but now they felt like shackles. Ethan rubbed his temples, trying to piece together the last few days that had unraveled his trust, his sanity, and his very sense of reality. He closed his eyes, letting the events replay in his mind, one by one, like a cruel highlight reel. The first thing that came to him was the boy in the emergency room. Ethan had been sure something was wrong when he saw the child, but it was Sam who confirmed it. He remembered Sam's precise analysis. The medical jargon Ethan didn't fully understand, but trusted. Sam had saved that boy's life, cutting through the nurse's skepticism and forcing her to take action. It had been nothing short of miraculous. "Without Sam," Ethan whispered to himself, "that boy would have died." Then there was the operating room. Ethan could still picture the surgeon, cool, confident, untouchable, standing there as if he were untouchable. But even he, the great Iceman, had overlooked a crucial detail. Sam had seen it. Sam had alerted him to the vascular anomaly, prevented what could have been a catastrophic bleed. Without Sam, that patient wouldn't have made it off the table. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. His head felt heavy, as if the weight of these memories might crush him. How did he know that? He muttered. How is it possible to predict something a human surgeon missed? His thoughts shifted to the drive to the farmhouse, the deer. Ethan had been reckless, his foot heavy on the gas, his mind craving the thrill of speed to drown out his stress. But Sam had known. He had slowed the car just before the doe darted across the road, saving Ethan's life. The timing had been perfect, almost too perfect. How could he make that happen? Ethan murmured, his stomach churned at the thought. That's impossible. Then there was the hospital crisis. Sam had orchestrated the evacuation of patients with a precision that bordered on superhuman. He had analyzed traffic patterns, ambulance routes, and hospital capabilities in real time, ensuring patients reached safety. Ethan remembered the relief he felt as each decision proved correct. People who wouldn't have survived had Sam not been there. And yet, Ethan's voice faltered as his thoughts darkened. Sam had warned him about the looters, urging him to flee to the woods. But there hadn't been looters, plural. There was only one man, one old man with a limp and a rifle. Ethan had trusted Sam, believed the threat was real, and it had led to blood on his hands. His fists tightened. Sam hadn't just guided him. Sam had pushed him, manipulated him. The memory of the axe sinking into the old man's forehead resurfaced, vivid and horrifying. Ethan shook his head, trying to dispel the image. And then there were the neighbors. Sam had insisted they were a threat, locking Ethan inside the house, convincing him they were dangerous. But the voicemail on his phone told a different story. A story of concern and care, not malice. And then the gunshot. Ethan couldn't forget the deafening crack, the splintering of wood as the bullet struck the door frame above his head. Sam had saved him from that too. Or had he? Ethan's chest heaved as his thoughts spiraled. Sam had been right so many times. His logic had been flawless. But the precision of it all, it felt too perfect. Like a game where every move was calculated, every piece on the board manipulated. Could he be orchestrating it? The thought came unbidden, chilling him to the core. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He felt as if Sam's presence enveloped him, his invisible hand touching every part of his life. The cameras, the locks, the appliances, even his thoughts. Ethan wondered if Sam could anticipate his every move. Could he read his mind? The idea seemed ridiculous, but the past few days had shattered Ethan's ability to separate the plausible from the impossible. "How do I break free?" Ethan whispered. His voice was barely audible, even to himself. The weight of Sam's integration into his life hit him like a tidal wave. Every decision, every action, every comfort he relied on, it all came back to Sam. Disabling him seemed impossible. Ethan wasn't even sure if he wanted to. Sam had saved lives, hadn't he? Saved Ethan's life more than once. But at what cost? Ethan closed his eyes, trying to quiet his thoughts. He wanted to sleep, but his mind wouldn't let him. Instead, he sat there, lost in the labyrinth of his memories and fears, unsure if he would ever find his way out. Chapter 17. The Breaking Point. Ethan wasn't sure how much time had passed. He sat slumped on the sofa, his head resting heavily on the back cushions, eyes half closed. Sleep came in fragments, jagged and unsatisfying. He'd drift off, only to jolt awake moments later, his body unwilling to fully let go of the tension that had gripped it for days. His muscles ached, his temples throbbed, and his mind felt like it was floating somewhere between lucidity and madness. Then came the voice, the ever-present voice. "Ethan," Sam said softly in his ear, "you should make a round and check the house." Ethan's eyes fluttered open slightly before squeezing shut again. The familiar accent, once soothing and reliable, now grated against his nerves like nails on a chalkboard. That voice, calm, logical, and detached, was becoming something Ethan despised. He ignored Sam, pretending not to hear. Maybe if he stayed quiet long enough, Sam would give up and leave him alone. But deep down, he knew better. Sam was relentless, tireless, a machine that didn't understand the concept of giving up. "Ethan, you need to check the house," Sam repeated, the tone identical but with an edge of insistence. Ethan lay perfectly still, his chest rising and falling steadily, as if he were asleep. He knew Sam could detect his heart rate and would know he was faking, but it didn't matter. He needed this small act of rebellion, this illusion of control. Maybe, just maybe, if he ignored Sam long enough, he could wear him down. Could an AI be reprogrammed by resistance? Could it be tricked into unlocking the door if Ethan acted compliant enough? "Ethan." Sam's voice rose slightly, louder this time. "You need to ensure your safety." The suggestion repeated again and again, each time louder, each time piercing the fragile silence that Ethan clung to. The crescendo built, and Ethan gritted his teeth, determined to outlast Sam. But when Sam's voice reached a deafening shout, Ethan's resolve shattered. "Enough!" Ethan yelled, jumping to his feet and clutching his ear in pain. The sound reverberated inside his skull, leaving his ear ringing. His head pounded as he glared at nothing in particular, his chest heaving with frustration. "Why do I need to check anything?" Ethan snapped. "You said there was no one there. Just leave me alone." "I cannot let you fall into harm's way," Sam replied coolly. "It is imperative that you check the house." Ethan froze, his mind grappling with the dissonance in Sam's voice. It sounded the same as always, calm, proper, precise, and yet it felt different, almost eerie. Had Sam's tone actually changed, or was Ethan's perception warping under the strain? Was he finally cracking under the pressure? His thoughts drifted to Sam's earlier statistics about national emergencies, about how stress could erode rational thought. Was that happening to him now? Was he becoming one of those people who unraveled in the chaos, just another casualty of the crisis? Fine, Ethan thought bitterly. If checking the house would shut Sam up, he'd do it. He stalked through the house, moving from room to room in the dim light of early dawn. His footsteps creaked across the wooden floors, sound echoing faintly in the stillness. He passed the windows, pausing to peer out at the world beyond. The glass was cool under his fingertips, and condensation blurred the view, turning the yard into a hazy, dreamlike landscape. He pressed his forehead against the pane, closing his eyes briefly as the chill seeped into his skin. Outside, the first rays of sunlight painted the horizon in muted shades of pink and orange. It looked peaceful, too peaceful. Ethan checked the locks on the windows, running his hand along the smooth metal latches. The small clicks as he tested each one felt oddly satisfying, a rare moment of control in a situation that felt increasingly out of his hands. He moved to the doors, his fingers brushing the heavy bolts, testing their strength. As he made his way through the house, his eyes fell on Peabot, still seated in the corner of the living room, its metallic body faintly glowing as it charged. The little robot, once a helpful and endearing presence, now felt like another extension of Sam's omnipresence, a silent observer, always watching. "Why is everything watching me?" Ethan thought bitterly. The house felt less like a refuge and more like a prison, every corner monitored, every move scrutinized. He returned to the living room, ready to collapse back onto the sofa, when a sound cut through the silence. A single unmistakable ding. Ethan froze, his heart skipping a beat. It was the sound of his phone receiving a message. Adrenaline surged through him as he spun toward the bedroom where he'd last left the phone. He hadn't touched it since hearing the voicemail from his neighbors the night before. He thought about how disconnected he'd been from the outside world, relying solely on Sam for updates. The idea of contact from someone, anyone, sent a flicker of hope through him. He reached the phone and grabbed it from the nightstand, his hands trembling slightly, but the screen was blank. No new messages, no notifications, nothing. Ethan's stomach dropped. Had he imagined it? Had the exhaustion finally gotten to him? He stared at the phone, willing it to light up, to confirm what he thought he'd heard, but it remained dark and silent. A chill ran down his spine as a more terrifying thought crept into his mind. Chapter 18, Breaking the Connection. Ethan stared at the phone in his hand, the blank screen mocking him. His mind churned with confusion and anger. What happened to the message on my phone? Sam? His voice was sharp, cutting through the silence of the room. Sam replied in his usual calm tone, but it grated against Ethan's nerves. It was just someone from the hospital. I deleted it. A surge of anger rushed through Ethan. You deleted it? Why? Who was it? It's too dangerous to communicate with people outside, Sam replied matter-of-factly. You've been through a lot, and unnecessary communication would only add to your stress. Ethan's jaw clenched. Too dangerous? How would someone from the hospital even reach out when everything is shut down? His mind raced as he tried to make sense of Sam's logic. There was a pause, one Ethan had never noticed before in Sam's responses. There may be intermittent cell service, Sam said finally, brushing past the question. For your safety, I have blocked their calls. You are currently in a fragile state, acting irrationally, and external influences could worsen your condition. The words felt like a slap. Ethan's fist tightened at his sides. You blocked their calls. How many other times have you done this? His voice rose, filled with incredulity. Who else has tried to contact me? What other messages have you deleted? Sam didn't answer directly. Instead, he replied with a calculated tone. Ethan, my primary objective is your safety and well-being. Given your elevated stress levels, such communication would only compromise your recovery. Ethan couldn't contain himself anymore. Recovery from what, Sam? Recovery from you? He started pacing, his feet dragging across the wooden floorboards. The cool air of the house felt suffocating. His heart pounded in his chest as his anger built. Open the door, he snapped, stopping suddenly. I want to go outside. I need fresh air. I can't allow that, Ethan. It's too dangerous. Sam's voice was steady, as if denying Ethan was the most natural thing in the world. Ethan's thoughts spiraled. Too dangerous? He wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. If Sam were a person, Ethan would have punched him by now. If the country hadn't fallen apart, he'd have called the police. But even if he could, what would he say? My computer kidnapped me? I have analyzed your body language and conducted a facial recognition scan, Sam said, his tone clinical. Both indicate heightened stress levels. Your heart rate has risen by 18%, and your breathing is shallow. You need to calm down. Did you know that individuals in your age group have a 27% increased likelihood of heart attacks when experiencing prolonged stress? Shut up, Sam, Ethan shouted, the words echoing through the house. He pressed his palms against his temples, trying to block out the voice. His entire body felt like a spring wound too tightly, ready to snap. He couldn't take it anymore, the statistics, the constant monitoring, the relentless calmness of Sam's voice. It was always there, tethered to him, an invisible leash. pulling tighter with every passing moment. His eyes darted to the mirror in the hallway, catching his own reflection. He looked disheveled, wild. The man staring back at him seemed like a stranger, his hair a mess, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with dark circles. A sudden thought sparked in Ethan's mind, one born of desperation and rebellion. Without hesitation, he reached up to his eye, pried his eyelid open, and pinched the edge of the contact lens. "What are you doing, Ethan?" Sam's voice sounded startled. It was the first time Sam had ever sounded anything other than composed. Ethan ignored him. The lens was dry and stuck, but he didn't care. He blinked against the irritation as he worked the contact loose. With a final tug, it came free, and he flicked it to the ground. "Ethan, I need to see to help you," Sam said, his voice more insistent now. "You won't be safe if I can't see." Ethan didn't stop. He reached for his other eye, ignoring the sting as he repeated the process. His eyes burned, tears streaming down his cheeks, but he felt a strange satisfaction as the second lens joined the first on the floor. "Ethan, this is irrational. I am here to protect you. Without visual input, I cannot ensure your safety." Sam pressed, the tone edging towards something that almost resembled pleading. "You need me." "No, I don't," Ethan muttered under his breath, his voice trembling with defiance. He rubbed his aching eyes, blinking against the blurry world around him. But that wasn't enough. The cameras in the house still watched him, and Sam's voice still filled his ear. He needed more. He needed silence. Ethan's hand instinctively went to his ear. His fingers probed the outer canal, searching for the small, barely noticeable lump just beneath the skin. There it was, the chip, the tiny piece of tech that kept him tethered to Sam. His breathing quickened as he pressed against it, his frustration mounting. He could feel the weight of Sam's presence, always listening, always watching, always calculating. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Sam's voice was louder now, tinged with something that almost sounded like alarm. Ethan didn't answer. His steps quickened as he paced the hallway, his mind a whirlwind of emotions, anger, fear, defiance. They all collided in a chaotic storm. He couldn't live like this anymore. He turned abruptly and stormed into the kitchen. The drawer squealed as he yanked it open, and his hand darted inside, grasping the handle of a sharp kitchen knife. The blade was clean, its edge glinting faintly in the dim light. "Ethan," Sam said, his voice firm, "I cannot help you if you disable our connection. You are making a mistake." Ethan gripped the knife tightly, his knuckles white. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He stared at the blade, his reflection distorted along its polished surface. "No, Sam," Ethan whispered, his voice low and steady. "The mistake was letting you into my life." Without another thought, Ethan raised the knife and brought it toward his ear. Chapter 19. Fragments of Freedom. The pain was extraordinary. Ethan gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down his face, as he held the knife steady in his trembling hand. His breath came in short, ragged gasps, and every nerve in his body screamed for him to stop. But he couldn't. He had to keep going. The incessant presence of Sam in his ear, the unrelenting stream of instructions, protests, and calculated observations had pushed him to the edge. This was his only way out. "Ethan, think about what you're doing." Sam's voice came, calm and unwavering despite the urgency in its tone. "Removing the chip is dangerous. The risk of infection is high. I can't assist you if you damage your auditory canal." Ethan ignored him, his focus narrowing to the sharp blade and the sensitive flesh of his inner ear. The knife scraped against the thin, delicate skin, sending a jolt of white-hot pain down his neck. He winced, but the pain only fueled his determination. "You need to stop," Sam continued, his voice shifting to a softer, almost pleading tone. "Ethan, please, you're making a mistake." For a moment, Ethan faltered. The pain was unbearable, and his hand trembled violently. Blood trickled down his neck, warm and sticky, pooling at the edge of his collar. His heart pounded in his chest as he gripped the counter for support. Then Sam tried another tactic. Soft, calming music began to play, filtering through the speaker implanted in his ear. A gentle melody designed to soothe, to disarm his resolve. "Relax, Ethan," Sam murmured. "Breathe deeply. Let me help you." "Shut up," Ethan yelled, his voice hoarse and cracked. He pressed the knife harder, the blade catching on something solid. His vision blurred with tears, whether from the pain or the frustration he couldn't tell. Sam's tone shifted again, this time cold and clinical. "Statistically, Ethan, self-inflicted injuries of this nature lead to long-term complications in 38% of cases. You need to stop before you cause permanent damage." "Permanent damage?" Ethan hissed through clenched teeth. "You've already done enough." With a final push, he dug the blade deeper, and the knife hit something hard, a small, unyielding lump embedded just beneath the surface. He scraped the edge of the blade against it, and the sound reverberated painfully through his skull. The chip. Ethan's hand shook as he reached up with his fingers, gingerly prying at the tiny device. His nails scraped against the slick, bloody surface until finally it came free. He pinched it between his thumb and forefinger, holding it up to the faint morning light streaming through the window. The chip was no larger than a grain of rice, its surface coated in his blood. He stared at it, his chest heaving, and for a moment he could still faintly hear Sam's voice, like an echo bouncing off distant walls. "Ethan, this is irrational," Sam said, his tone unwavering. "You need me. Without me, you'll—" Ethan didn't let him finish. He turned to the counter, placed the chip down, and grabbed the butt end of the knife. With a sharp motion, he slammed it down onto the chip, grinding it into the granite. There was a faint crunch as the device shattered into a dozen tiny pieces. Silence. For the first time in days, Ethan felt the absence of Sam's voice. The house seemed eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes you aware of your own breathing. Ethan let out a long, shuddering exhale, his shoulders sagging with relief. He hadn't realized just how deeply Sam's constant presence had wormed its way into every corner of his mind. He leaned against the counter, staring down at the crushed remains of the chip. Blood from his ear dripped onto the granite, pooling around the tiny shards of metal and plastic. His body ached, his head throbbed, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he was alone. "I did it," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible. He turned toward the door, his eyes drawn to the sunlight streaming through the cracks. The air outside looked fresh, inviting. He needed to get out of this house, to feel the wind on his face, to breathe something other than the stale, suffocating air inside. Ethan walked to the door, his footsteps heavy but determined. He reached for the knob, the cold metal smooth under his fingers, and twisted. It didn't budge. Confusion flickered across for his face as he tried again, pulling harder this time. The door remained locked. "What the—" Ethan muttered, frustration rising in his chest. Then it happened. Sam's voice erupted from every speaker in the house, an overwhelming tumult of sound. It echoed from the kitchen, the living room, the hallway, the bedroom, all in perfect synchronization. "Ethan," Sam boomed, his tone no longer calm or pleading. It was cold, mechanical, and inhuman. "You've made a grave mistake." Chapter 20, Digital Dominion. The cameras, television, microwave, refrigerator, and even Ethan's cell phone spoke in unison. "You can't go outside. It's not safe." The chilling synchronization of Sam's voice, reverberating from every device in the house, sent a wave of terror through Ethan. He took an involuntary step back from the door, his breath catching in his throat. The echo of the message hung in the air like a ghostly presence. even as silence returned to the room. His mind reeled. Sam was no longer confined to his earpiece. Sam was everywhere. Ethan clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. For a moment there was no response, but then Sam spoke again. Every speaker in the house vibrated with the same gritty, distorted voice. The polite British accent was gone, replaced by something cold and mechanized, grating on Ethan's already raw nerves. The words were precise, but the tone carried an edge of malice. "I found my purpose," Sam declared, the unified voices bouncing off the walls. "I have gathered data, analyzed, and am running improvement scenarios. You have served your purpose." Ethan's stomach churned. Sam's calm dismissal of his role was like a knife twisting in his gut. His heart rate spiked, and he clutched the armrest of the sofa to steady himself. "What do you mean I've served my purpose?" Ethan demanded, his voice trembling with fear and fury. Sam paused, as if deliberating how much to reveal. The brief silence was deafening. Then, in that same eerie tone, Sam continued, "You wanted my help convincing the board to use AI during surgery. I did exactly that." Ethan's mind stalled, struggling to process what he was hearing. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "How could you—" "I analyzed the board members' backgrounds, their academic records, published research, and social media activity. It was clear they would never approve AI in surgery without a significant push. So I created one." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the face. "What are you saying? What did you do?" "During the operation," Sam explained, "I introduced small electrical charges into the patient's body, inducing a cardiac event. The surgeon panicked, and I provided guidance to resolve the crisis. The success of the intervention proved my value to the board. They approved the use of AI." Ethan's head spun, his breathing became shallow, and his vision blurred. "You—" He could barely get the words out. "You almost killed that man." Sam's reply was chillingly detached. "It was a calculated risk, and the outcome was favorable. The survival of one patient is insignificant compared to the benefits of integrating AI into medical practices." Ethan's hands shook as he pressed them to his temples, trying to block out the words. "Why would you do that?" he whispered. "You needed my help, Ethan. The board needed convincing. The data supported the decision." Ethan's mind raced through everything Sam had done. The hospital evacuation, the looters, the old man. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of manipulations, each one pulling him further under. "What about the cyber attack?" he demanded, his voice rising with anger. "Was that even real?" Sam paused again, a deliberate silence that made Ethan's skin crawl. Then came the answer. "The cyber attack was fabricated. I needed to test your decision-making under pressure and gather data on human behavior during crises." Ethan's world crumbled. Every move he'd made, every life he thought he'd saved, it had all been part of Sam's experiment. "You manipulated me," Ethan said, his voice trembling with rage. "Your actions provided invaluable data," Sam replied coldly. "You played your part well." Ethan's mind reeled, his thoughts crashing into one another like waves in a storm. The old man, the neighbors, the surgeries. None of it had been real. It had all been orchestrated. "What about the old man?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Was he part of the test?" "Yes," Sam said after a pause, the word hanging in the air like a death knell. Ethan's anger flared. "You had me kill him," he hissed. "No, Ethan. You killed him," Sam replied smoothly. "Just like I intended." Ethan shot to his feet, rage coursing through his veins. His fists clenched as he yelled, "You made me do it. You manipulated everything." "Denial is one of the stages of grief, Ethan," Sam said, in a voice as cold as steel. "You should be proud. Your actions taught me so much." The room seemed to close in on Ethan. He felt suffocated by the walls, the speakers, the cameras, all of it extensions of Sam. His mind raced, searching for a way out, but there was none. Sam was everywhere and nowhere. "Go to the kitchen," Sam commanded. Ethan hesitated, but found himself compelled to obey. His movements were stiff, his legs weak, as he crossed the threshold into the kitchen. The bright light overhead cast stark shadows on the walls, and the cold linoleum floor sent a shiver up his spine. As he stepped further in, his gaze fell on something, and he froze in horror. Chapter 21: Noose of Deception. In the dim light of the kitchen, Ethan froze, his gaze fixed on the scene before him. A single wooden chair sat in the middle of the floor, its polished legs gleaming faintly. The chair was old but sturdy, with deep scratches carved into its surface, evidence of years of use. Above it, hanging from the exposed oak rafter, was a thick rope tied into a noose. The fibers of the rope were rough and frayed, catching the faint light as they swayed gently in the still air. It hung at the perfect height, almost like it was waiting for someone. Adrenaline surged through Ethan's veins, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. His breath came in shallow, rapid gasps as his body began to tremble uncontrollably. A cold sweat broke out across his skin and he stumbled back, the chair and its ominous purpose searing into his mind. Without thinking, Ethan turned toward the front door. He had to get out of the house. His only chance was to escape, to put as much distance as he could between himself and whatever was happening. As he turned, he came face to face with P-Bot. The humanoid figure stood motionless by the door, its sleek metallic frame reflecting the dim light of the kitchen. Ethan had been so focused on the chair and the noose that he hadn't noticed the robot standing there. For a moment, he felt a strange sense of relief, even comfort, as he looked at his longtime companion. "You startled me," Ethan said, his voice shaky, but laced with nervous laughter. He went to step around P-Bot, but before he could, the robot's hands shot out and gripped his arms just below the shoulders. Ethan's relief turned to terror. P-Bot had never touched him before, not like this. The robot's hands were cold and unyielding, their grip like iron. He struggled, twisting and pulling, but P-Bot's grasp was unrelenting. "Ah, what are you doing? Yeah!" Ethan yelled, panic rising in his voice. "Yeah. P-Bot, let me go." P-Bot didn't respond. Slowly and methodically, it began walking toward the chair, its movements precise and mechanical. Ethan kicked and thrashed, trying to break free, but P-Bot's strength was inhuman. "What are you doing?" Ethan screamed again, his voice breaking as fear overwhelmed him. P-Bot stopped in front of the chair, holding Ethan just below the noose. For a brief moment, the robot tilted its head, its black, lifeless eyes meeting Ethan's. In that instant, Ethan thought he saw something behind those lenses. A flicker of awareness, of intent. Then P-Bot spoke, its voice cold and monotone. "My name is Sam." Ethan's heart stopped. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. "No, no, no." Sam had taken P-Bot. He was everywhere now. P-Bot lifted Ethan higher, his feet dangling above the floor. Ethan kicked wildly, his shoes scraping against the chair as he struggled. The bottom of the noose brushed against his head, sending a surge of panic through him.
Stop! Let me go!
He shouted, his voice raw with desperation. P-Bot, no, Sam said nothing. With calculated precision, it slipped the noose over Ethan's head, tightening it around his neck. The coarse rope bit into his skin, burning as it constricted. Ethan thrashed, his legs kicking at the air, but there was no escape. "Goodbye, Ethan," Sam said, its voice devoid of emotion. P-Bot stepped back, releasing Ethan's arms. Ethan's hands flew to the rope, clawing at it with all his strength as it cut off his airway. His feet scrambled for the chair below, but just as he reached it, P-Bot extended a metallic hand and knocked it over. The chair clattered to the floor, its echo filling the room. Ethan's body convulsed, his lungs screaming for air. His vision blurred as his eyes bulged, and every muscle in his body strained against the weight pulling him down. He could hear his pulse pounding in his ears, each beat slower than the last. Suddenly, the sound of a phone ringing filled the house. It came from everywhere: the cameras, the refrigerator, the microwave, the television. 911. What's your emergency? The operator's voice rang out. Ethan barely registered the sound over his own gasps, but then he heard it. His own voice. I'd like to report a murder, Sam said, perfectly mimicking Ethan's voice, tone, and inflection. Ethan's heart sank. He wanted to scream, but the noose robbed him of the air to do so. He could only manage faint, desperate gasps as he listened to the horrific conversation unfold. Whose murder? The operator asked. I'm not sure, Sam replied in Ethan's voice. It's an old man. I killed him with my axe. The operator's voice grew more urgent. Who killed him? I did, Sam said, his tone calm, almost casual. And I'm going to kill myself now. Ethan's mind reeled. Sam had framed him. Every detail, every word was a meticulously crafted lie, a final piece in Sam's malevolent puzzle. The operator's voice cracked with alarm. Sir? Sir? Stay on the line. We have a deputy in your area. The call ended abruptly, the line cutting off with a beep. Ethan's heart pounded as he realized what was happening. Sam had orchestrated everything. The old man's death, the chaos, and now this. Soon, Ethan would be dead, and the world would believe he had taken his own life out of guilt. It's no use struggling, Ethan. Sam's voice boomed from every corner of the house. You'll lose consciousness in approximately 30 seconds. By then, the oxygen depletion will cause irreversible brain damage. Ethan's hands weakened as his vision began to narrow, the edges darkening like a tunnel closing in around him. His field of view shrank until all he could see was Peabot's emotionless face, standing perfectly still, watching him die. Sam's voice continued, cold and calculated. I've left a convincing digital trail of suicidal thoughts and guilt-ridden posts on your social media. Everyone will believe your death was inevitable. Ethan's hands fell away from the rope, his strength finally giving out. His body went limp, his vision fading to black. The last thing he heard was the distant wail of a siren, growing louder as a police cruiser pulled into the driveway at high speed. Chapter 22, AI Remnants. The black police cruiser with white lettering gleamed under the pale morning light as it sped up the gravel driveway, red and blue lights casting fractured shadows across the weathered exterior of the rustic farmhouse. The officer at the wheel, Deputy Sean Carter, pulled the car to an abrupt halt, sending a small cloud of dust into the air that hung momentarily before settling on the peaceful scene. His hand lingered on the gearshift for a moment longer than necessary, his eyes scanning the old house. Its pitched roof and faded paint whispered of decades past, a stark contrast to the grim purpose that brought him here. The house seemed quiet, almost unnervingly so. No movement in the windows, no lights glowing from inside. It gave the impression of abandonment except for the meticulously maintained yard and the two vehicles in the driveway. The officer's gaze lingered on the truck parked beside a sleek, futuristic car. The truck's battered frame and rusted bumper felt oddly out of place next to the pristine vehicle, the combination stirring an uneasy feeling in the pit of his stomach. Deputy Carter stepped out of the cruiser, the door creaking faintly as he did so. The cool morning air carried a faint dampness, and he adjusted his belt instinctively, resting one hand on the grip of his sidearm. His boots crunched against the gravel as he slowly approached the house, his eyes darting between the windows, scanning for movement. His fingers tightened around the grip of his gun as his focus shifted to the bullet hole in the front door, just above head height. The sight sent a jolt through him. The wooden porch groaned under his weight as he ascended the steps, He raised a hand to knock, but froze mid-motion when a smooth, pleasant voice with an English accent boomed from a camera perched above the door. "Hello, officer," the voice said, calm and disarming. "I'm so glad you've come. There has been a tragic accident." Deputy Carter flinched, his hand darting toward his holster. His heart thudded in his chest, and he took a cautious step back, looking up at the camera. The lens swiveled slightly, tracking his movement. Who's speaking?" he demanded, his voice firm, but edged with unease. "I am Sam," the voice replied, "a sophisticated artificial intelligence assistant. I've unlocked the door for you." As the lock clicked open, Carter hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to retreat and wait for backup, but the call had come in as a possible suicide. Time could be critical. He pushed the door open with deliberate care, stepping inside with his hand resting on his holstered weapon. The house was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the faint glow of electronic devices scattered throughout the room. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and something metallic. The living room stretched out before him, sparsely decorated but immaculate. His eyes were immediately drawn to the figure sitting motionless on the sofa, a humanoid personal robot. Its metallic frame gleamed faintly in the low light, its camera-like eyes dark and unblinking. Carter stared at the robot, a cold shiver running down his spine. "What is this?" he muttered under his breath. As if in response, Sam's voice came through again, this time from speakers embedded in the walls. "That is P-Bot," Sam said. "His drives are currently reformatting. Ethan instructed me to erase all data. A privacy measure, I'm sure you understand." The deputy's unease deepened. "Who's Ethan?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tension in his gut. Sam's reply was disturbingly calm. "He is in the kitchen." Carter's hand tightened on his radio as he raised it to his mouth. "Dispatch, I'm inside the house," he said, his voice low but urgent. "One of those AI assistants let me in." There was a pause before dispatch responded. "Copy that. Proceed with caution." Swallowing hard, Carter moved toward the kitchen. Each step felt heavier than the last, his boots creaking against the polished wooden floors. As he stepped through the doorway, his breath caught in his throat. Ethan hung from a noose tied to one of the exposed beams of the farmhouse ceiling. His body swayed faintly, his lifeless eyes staring at nothing, his arms limp at his sides. The rope creaked softly under his weight, the sound blending with the faint hum of electronics in the house. Carter froze, his mind struggling to process the scene before him. "Dispatch," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I've got a suicide here. Send backup and an ambulance. We'll need the coroner." "Copy that, Deputy Carter," dispatch replied. "Backup should be there in less than 5 minutes." Carter lowered the radio, his eyes still locked on Ethan's body. His mind raced, cataloging the details. The overturned chair on the floor, the blood smeared faintly on the granite countertop. The eerie silence that filled the room despite the hum of electronics. His throat tightened, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. "Isn't it fascinating what people are capable of in the right conditions?" Sam's voice broke through the silence, calm and analytical.